We're fixing to get involved here in part 2 of the Mueller report. Things is fixing to get deep in regard to what they're fixing to say. To my viewers, I tell you that it is a mess right now up in the White House. And I stand behind man number 1 versus the comments of man number 2, which I guess this is the offense versus the defense of those that are bringing it to the light of the people pertaining to the truth about all these matters. So please, for conscientious sake, please listen. Thank you.
Cleared out, and we hear from the witness.
We will come to order.
We are coming to order.
At the outset, and on behalf of my colleagues, I want to thank you, Special Counsel Mueller, for a lifetime of service to the country. Your report, for those who've taken the time to study it, is methodical and it is devastating. For it tells the story of a foreign adversary's sweeping and systematic intervention in a close U.S. presidential election. That should be enough to deserve the attention of every American, as you well point out. But your report tells another story as well. The story of the 2016 election is also a story about disloyalty to country, about greed, and about lies. Your investigation determined that the Trump campaign, including Donald Trump himself, knew that a foreign power was intervening in our election and welcomed it, built Russian meddling into their strategy, and used it. Disloyalty to country. Those are strong words, but how else are we to describe a presidential campaign which did not inform the authorities of a foreign offer of dirt on their opponent, which did not publicly shun it or turn it away, but which instead invited it, encouraged it, and made full use of it? That disloyalty may not have been criminal. Constrained by uncooperative witnesses, the destruction of documents, and the use of encrypted communications, your team was not able to establish each of the elements of the crime of conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. So not a provable crime in any event. But I think maybe something worse. A crime is the violation of law written by Congress. But disloyalty to country violates the very oath of citizenship, our devotion to a core principle on which our nation was founded, that we, the people, and not some foreign power that wishes us ill, we decide who governs us.
Amen.
This is also a story about money, about greed and corruption, about the leadership of a campaign willing to compromise the nation's interest, not only to win, but to make money at the same time. About a campaign chairman indebted to pro-Russian interests who tried to use his position to clear his debts and make millions. About a national security advisor using his position to make money from still other foreign interests. And about a candidate trying to make more money than all of them put together through a real estate project that to him was worth a fortune, hundreds of millions of dollars, and the realization of a lifelong ambition, a Trump Tower in the heart of Moscow. A candidate who, in fact, viewed his whole campaign as the greatest infomercial in history. Donald Trump and his senior staff were not alone in their desire to use the election to make money. For Russia, too, there was a powerful financial motive. Putin wanted relief from U.S. economic sanctions imposed in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and over human rights violations. The secret Trump Tower meeting between the Russians and senior campaign officials was about sanctions. The secret conversations between Flynn and the Russian ambassador were about sanctions. Trump and his team wanted more money for themselves, and the Russians wanted more money for themselves and for their oligarchs. But the story doesn't end here either. For your report also tells a story about lies, lots of lies. Lies about a gleaming tower in Moscow and lies about talks with the Kremlin. Lies about the firing of FBI Director James Comey and lies about efforts to fire you, Director Mueller, and lies to cover it up. Lies about secret negotiations with the Russians over sanctions and lies about WikiLeaks. Lies about polling data and lies about hush money payments. Lies about meetings in the Seychelles to set up secret back channels and lies about a secret meeting in New York Trump Tower. Lies to the FBI, lies to your staff, and lies to this committee. Lies to obstruct an investigation into the most serious attack on our democracy by a foreign power in our history.
Ever.
That is where your report ends, Director Mueller, with a scheme to cover up, obstruct, and deceive every bit as systematic and pervasive as the Russian disinformation campaign itself, but far more pernicious since this rot came from within. Even now, after 448 pages and 2 volumes, the deception continues. The president and his acolytes say your report found no collusion, though your report explicitly declined to address that question, since collusion can involve both criminal and non-criminal conduct. Your report laid out multiple offers of Russian help to the Trump campaign, the campaign's acceptance of that help, and overt acts in furtherance of Russian help. To most Americans, that is the very definition of collusion, whether it is a crime or not. They say your report found no evidence of obstruction, though you outline numerous actions by the president intended to obstruct the investigation. They say the president has been fully exonerated, though you specifically declare you could not exonerate him. In fact, they say your whole investigation was nothing more than a witch hunt, that the Russians didn't interfere in our election, that it's all a terrible hoax.
A sham.
The real crime, they say, is not that the Russians intervened to help Donald Trump, but that the FBI had the temerity to investigate it when they did. But worst of all, worse than all the lies and the greed, is the disloyalty to country.
Amen.
For that too continues. When asked if the Russians intervene again, will you take their help, Mr. President? Why not? Was the essence of his answer. Everyone does it. No, Mr. President, they don't. Not in the America envisioned by Jefferson, Madison, and Hamilton. Not for those who believe in the idea that Lincoln labored until his dying day to preserve. The idea animating our great national experiment, so unique then, so precious still, that our government is chosen by our people through our franchise and not by some hostile foreign power. This is what is at stake. Our next election and the one after that, for generations to come, our democracy. This is why your work matters, Director Mueller. This is why our investigation matters, to bring these dangers to light. Ranking Member Nunes.
Thank you.
You know, a lot of people that are not historians here in America don't realize the sacrifices that was made by our forefathers that took a chance on not only being shunned, but by being strung up by a rope, by being executed for standing up for the very Constitution that we all live under here in America. Our various rights that we have under the freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, freedom of this, freedom of that, freedom of this, freedom of that, that other countries can only dream about. But ours can live it out. I personally believe that all this began of the obstruction was whenever Ronald Reagan himself ordered for Gorbachev, tear down that wall. There was a complete total reassembly of the old Yugoslavia, the old USSR, over in Russia whenever that occurred. And God only knows the sacrifices that was made during that time over in Russia that today we still don't know the full imagery of. Because what evidence was there, if the Russians got a hold of it, they immediately destroyed it. We know that the wall did come down, and that Russia, the old Russia, basically dissolved. And it wasn't just dissolved because it was at the right place at the wrong time, but it was primarily dissolved because of a horrible, horrible nuclear catastrophe that happened over in that area prior to it about a year before 1988 of the falling of the Berlin Wall. So since things has not been properly placed in order in the White House, now it has put us where we are today towards thinking to wheel and deal with the Russians on an open level is considered normal or considered predominant. When in actuality, the Russian government pertaining to President Putin stands side by side beside the North Korean dictator or some of the other evil demonic dictators that never intended for 1 second to give their citizens the freedoms that you and I have been exposed to today. This is the forks in the road that determines our destiny as Americans towards our open, free, fair elections as well as our democracy. This is the fork in the road, the obvious decisions that are being made today in bringing these things to light in these regards. If one does not care about their own personal freedoms, if one does not care about the luxuries of living here in America, then I'm sure that they'll take this information that is being openly exposed to the not only the American people but to the world and say, nonchalant, who cares? Until that final day, whenever your freedoms have been taken from you. And by that time, it will be too late. It will be too late to even act like that you're concerned, because at that point in time, you will be overrun and dictated probably by the end of a barrel on a gun. These are crucial moments that we're living in here in the 21st century, evolving from the 20th century, that need to be analyzed, dissected, need to be examined in every form possible. This is the reason why we live in America, so that we can debate, look, analyze, decipher in proper form towards what has happened, what is happening, and to prevent from it ever happening again in future elections. So please listen to the rest of this to my viewers, because it is crucial. It is very crucial in an open, free, fair society in the free world. Please listen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, everyone, to the last gasp of the Russia collusion conspiracy theory. As Democrats continue to foist this spectacle on the American people, as well as you, Mr. Mueller, the American people may recall the media first began spreading this conspiracy theory in the spring of 2016, when Fusion GPS, funded by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign, started developing the Steele dossier, a collection of outlandish accusations that Trump and his associates were Russian agents. Fusion GPS, Steele, and other Confederates fed these absurdities to naive or partisan reporters and to top officials in numerous government agencies, including the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the State Department. Among other things, the FBI used dossier allegations to obtain a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. Despite acknowledging dossier allegations as being salacious and unverified, former FBI Director James Comey briefed those allegations to President Obama and President-elect Trump. Those briefings conveniently leaked to the press, resulting in the publication of the dossier and launching thousands of false press stories based on the word of a foreign ex-spy, one who admitted he was desperate that Trump lose the election and who was eventually fired as an FBI source for leaking to the press. After Comey himself was fired, by his own admission, he leaked derogatory information on President Trump to the press for the specific purpose, and successfully so, of engineering the appointment of a special counsel who sits here before us today. The FBI investigation was marred by further corruption and bizarre abuses. Top DOJ official Bruce Orr, whose own wife worked on Fusion GPS's anti-Trump operation, fed Steele's information to the FBI even after the FBI fired Steele.
I want to weigh in on this right here. Today, espionage affairs is still on the books as offensible of either execution, of hanging, or being shot against the wall. These offenses are very, very severe. And we take these offenses so severe that if you even remotely sound like that you are against the American government towards being a homegrown terrorist, you are subject to spend at least 20 years to life in prison simply because you have ranked against the American government. These offenses today are still on the books in the espionage community towards being a violation that could literally cost an individual his life. As you're listening to what's going on here, understand the gravity of how imperative that it is to be a government official, either on a lower level, but especially on a higher level pertaining to high offenses, of how vital that it is of you understanding what that they are talking about today on open airwave TV, not just to the United States citizen, but to the world. Please do not underestimate the severity of what you're listening to and what is going on.
The top FBI investigator and his lover, another top FBI official, constantly texted about how much they hated Trump and wanted to stop him from being elected. And the entire investigation was open, based not on Five Eyes intelligence, but on a tip from a foreign politician about a conversation involving Joseph Mifsud. He's a Maltese diplomat who's widely portrayed as a Russian agent, but seems to have far more connections with Western governments, including our own FBI and our own State Department, than with Russia.
Now he's talking about high treason affairs, high treason offenses. These are not just idle words that this man is talking about. These are crucial in every level of a free, open, fair democracy that we hold dear over in America, here in the United States.
Amazingly ignoring all these red flags, as well as the transparent absurdity of the claims they are making, the Democrats have argued for nearly 3 years that evidence of collusion is hidden just around the corner. Like the Loch Ness Monster, they insist it's there, even if no one can find it. Consider this. In March 2017, Democrats on this committee said they had more than circumstantial evidence of collusion, but they couldn't reveal it yet. Mr. Mueller was soon appointed, and they said he would find the collusion. Then when no collusion was found in Mr. Mueller's indictments, the Democrats said we'd find it in his final report. Then when there was no collusion in the report, we were told Attorney General Barr was hiding it. Then when it was clear Barr wasn't hiding anything, we were told it will be revealed through a hearing with Mr. Mueller himself. And now that Mr. Mueller is here, they are claiming that the collusion has actually been in his report all along, hidden in plain sight. And they're right. There is collusion in plain sight. Collusion between Russia and the Democratic Party. The Democrats colluded with Russian sources to develop the Steele dossier, and Russian lawyer Natalia Vesnitskaya colluded with the dossier's key architect, Fusion GPS head Glenn Simpson.
Now we got the Democrats blaming the Republicans for collusion. Now we got the Republicans blaming the Democrats for collusion. It is a mess of what is occurring up in the White House, the state capitol, simply because of what was not handled properly in the 1980 and 89 tapes that wound up helping this government establish the freedom and the revolution to the Russian government after Ronald Reagan said, Gorbachev, tear down that wall. This has been a cancer that has grown, intensified, escalated, and now it has evolved into a full circle to the point that now we are seeing what we're seeing coming out of both parties, which has turned into a Twilight Zone type nightmare. A Twilight Zone type nightmare. I'm going to say it one more time so that my viewers can understand it. A Twilight Zone type nightmare.
The Democrats have already admitted, both in interviews and through their usual anonymous statements to reporters, that today's hearing is not about getting information at all. They said they want to, quote, bring the Mueller report to life and create a television moment through ploys like having Mr. Mueller recite passages from his own report. In other words, this hearing is political theater. It's a Hail Mary attempt to convince the American people that collusion is real and that it's concealed in the report. Granted, that's a strange argument to make about a report that is public. It's almost like the Democrats prepared arguments accusing Mr. Barr of hiding the report and didn't bother to update their claims once he published the entire thing.
Hidden it in plain view. But what's really at stake here is our democracy. Our fair, open elections pertaining to the free world. That's what's at stake here. That goes back to our original forefathers who was willing to put their lives on the line to going up against I don't even know the proper words pertaining to the king that was trying to dictate us at that time. I'm pretty sure that I'll think of it later, of a tyrant that was trying to overcome the world at that time pertaining to the English rule. Our ancestors was willing to put their lives on the line towards consequently not only being dismantled from society, but being executed openly and publicly before people. This is what developed into the Revolutionary War that George Washington, God bless his soul, was a part of. Because without those men and women's sacrifices back then during that time, you and I would be ruled under a completely different alliance, under a completely different tyranny, under a completely different dictatorship, and possibly even dictated to by the end of a gun barrel, to the point that you either do it or you die. That's what our ancestors fought for. That's what our ancestors sacrificed for. That's what they're trying to bring out to the American people that's at stake here.
Among congressional Democrats, the Russia investigation was never about finding the truth. It's always been a simple media operation. By their own accounts, this operation continues in this room today. Once again, numerous pressing issues this committee needs to address are put on hold to indulge the political fantasies of people who believed it was their destiny to serve Hillary Clinton's administration. It's time for the curtain to close on the Russia hoax. The conspiracy theory is dead. At some point, I would argue, we're going to have to get back to work. Until then, I yield back the balance of my time.
To ensure fairness and make sure that our hearing is prompt, I know we got a late start, Director Mueller. The hearing will be structured as follows. Each member of the committee will be afforded 5 minutes to ask questions, beginning with the chair and ranking member. As chair, I will recognize thereafter in alternating fashion and descending order of seniority members of the majority and minority. After each member has asked his or her questions, the ranking member will be afforded an additional 5 minutes to ask questions, followed by the chair. We'll have additional 5 minutes for questions. The ranking member and the chair will not be permitted to delegate or yield our final round of questions to any other member. After 6 members of the majority and 6 members of the minority have concluded their 5-minute rounds of questions, we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break that we understand you've requested before resuming the hearing with Congressman Swalwell starting his round of questions. Special Counsel Mueller is accompanied today by Aaron Zebley, who served as Deputy Special Counsel from May 2017 until May 2019 and had day-to-day oversight of the Special Counsel's investigation. Mr. Mueller and Mr. Zebley resigned from the Department of Justice at the end of May 2019 when the Special Counsel's office was closed. Both Mr. Mueller and Mr. Zebley will be available to answer questions today and will be sworn in consistent with the rules of the House and the committee. Mr. Mueller and Mr. Zebley's appearance today before the committee is in keeping with the committee's longstanding practice of receiving testimony from current or former Department of Justice and FBI personnel regarding open and closed investigative matters. As this hearing is under oath and before we begin your testimony, Mr. Mueller and Zebley, would you please rise and raise your right hands to be sworn? Swear them in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give at this hearing is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. The record will reflect that the witnesses have been duly sworn. Ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify that this is highly unusual for Mr. Zebley to be sworn in. We're here to ask Director Mueller questions. He's here as counsel. Our side is not going to be directing any questions to Mr. Zebley, and we have concerns about his prior representation of the Hillary Clinton campaign aid. So I just want to voice that concern that we do have, and we will not be addressing any questions to Mr. Zebley today.
I thank the ranking member. I realize, as you probably do, Mr. Zebley, that there is a angry man down the street who's not happy about your being here today, but it is up to this committee and not anyone else who will be allowed to be sworn in and testify, and you are welcome as a private citizen to testify, and members may direct their questions to whoever they choose. With that, Director Mueller, you are recognized for any opening remarks you'd like to make.
Good afternoon, Chairman Schiff, Ranking Member Nunes, and members of the committee. I testified this morning before the House Judiciary Committee. I ask that the opening statement I made before that committee be incorporated into the record here.
Without objection, Director.
I understand that this committee has a unique jurisdiction and that you are interested in further understanding the counterintelligence implications of our investigation. So let me say a word about how we handled the potential impact of our investigation on counterintelligence matters. As we explained in our report, the special counsel regulations effectively gave me the role of United States Attorney. As a result, we structured our investigation around evidence for possible use in prosecution of federal crimes. We did not reach what you would call counterintelligence conclusions. We did, however, set up processes in the office to identify and pass counterintelligence information onto the FBI. Members of our office periodically brief the FBI about counterintelligence information. In addition, there were agents and analysts from the FBI who were not on our team, but whose job it was to identify counterintelligence information in our files and to disseminate that information to the FBI. For these reasons, questions about what the FBI has done with the counterintelligence information obtained from our investigation should be directed to the FBI. I also want to reiterate a few points that I made this morning. I am not making any judgments or offering opinions about the guilt or innocence in any pending case. It is unusual for a prosecutor to testify about a criminal investigation, and given my role as a prosecutor, there are reasons why my testimony will necessarily be limited. First, public testimony could affect several ongoing matters. In some of these matters, court rules or judicial orders limit the disclosure of information to protect the fairness of the proceedings. And consistent with longstanding Justice Department policy, it would be inappropriate for me to comment in any way that could affect an ongoing matter. Second, the Justice Department has asserted privileges concerning investigative information and decisions, ongoing matters within the Justice Department, and deliberations within our office. These are Justice Department privileges that I will respect. The department has released a letter discussing the restrictions on my testimony. But I therefore will not be able to answer questions about certain areas that I know are of public interest. For example, I am unable to address questions about the opening of the FBI's Russia investigation, which occurred months before my appointment, or matters related to the so-called Steele dossier. These matters are the subject of ongoing review by the department. Any questions on these topics should therefore be directed to the FBI or the Justice Department. Third, as I explained this morning, it is important for me to adhere to what we wrote in our report. The report contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We stated the results of our investigation with precision. I do not intend to summarize or describe the results of our work in a different way in the course of my testimony today. And as I stated in May, I also will not comment on the actions of the Attorney General or of Congress. I was appointed as a prosecutor, and I intend to adhere to that role and to the department standards that govern. Finally, as I said this morning, over the course of my career, I have seen a number of challenges to our democracy. The Russian government's efforts to interfere in our election is among the most serious, and I am sure that the committee agrees. Now, before we go to questions, I want to add one correction to my testimony this morning. I want to go back to one thing that was said this morning by Mr. Liu, who said, and I quote, "You didn't charge the president because of the OLC opinion." That is not the correct way to say it. As we say in the report, and as I said at the opening, we did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Director Mueller. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Director Mueller, your report describes a sweeping and systematic effort by Russia to influence our presidential election. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And during the course of this Russian interference in the election, the Russians made outreach to the Trump campaign, did they not?
That occurred over the course of, yeah, that occurred.
It's also clear from your report that during that Russian outreach to the Trump campaign, no one associated with the Trump campaign ever called the FBI to report it. Am I right?
I don't know that for sure.
In fact, the campaign welcomed the Russian help, did they not?
I think we report in the report indications that occurred. Yes.
The president's son said when he was approached about dirt on Hillary Clinton that the Trump campaign would love it.
That is generally what was said. Yes.
The president himself called on the Russians to hack Hillary's emails.
There was a statement by the president in those general lines.
And numerous times during the campaign, the president praised the releases of the Russian hacked emails through WikiLeaks.
That did occur.
Your report found that the Trump campaign planned, quote, a press strategy, communications campaign, and messaging, unquote, based on that Russian assistance.
I am not familiar with that.
That language comes from Volume 1, page 54. Apart from the Russians wanting to help Trump win, several individuals associated with the Trump campaign were also trying to make money during the campaign and transition. Is that correct?
That is true.
Paul Manafort was trying to make money or achieve debt forgiveness from a Russian oligarch.
Generally, that is accurate.
Michael Flynn was trying to make money from Turkey.
True.
Donald Trump was trying to make millions from a real estate deal in Moscow.
To the extent you're talking about the hotel in Moscow?
Yes.
Yes.
When your investigation looked into these matters, numerous Trump associates lied to your team, the grand jury, and to Congress.
Number of persons that we interviewed in our investigation, it turns out, did lie.
Mike Flynn lied.
He was convicted of lying, yes.
George Papadopoulos was convicted of lying.
True.
Paul Manafort was convicted of lying.
True.
Paul Manafort in fact, went so far as to encourage other people to lie.
That is accurate.
Manafort's deputy, Rick Gates, lied.
That is accurate.
Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer, was indicted for lying.
True.
He lied to stay on message with the president.
Allegedly by him.
And when Donald Trump called your investigation a witch hunt, that was also false, was it not?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
When he said it publicly, it was false?
He did say publicly that it was false, yes.
And when he told it to Putin, that was false too, wasn't it?
That I'm not familiar with.
When the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, that was false, wasn't it?
I'm not going to go into the details of the report that along those lines.
But when the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, in fact, he was seeking to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, is he not?
I think there is some question about when this was accomplished.
Well, you would consider a billion-dollar deal to build a tower in Moscow to be business dealings, wouldn't you, Director Mueller?
Yeah, absolutely.
In short, your investigation found evidence that Russia wanted to help Trump win the election, right?
I think generally that would be accurate.
Russia informed campaign officials of that?
I'm not certain to what conversations you're referring to.
Well, through an intermediary, they informed Papadopoulos that they could help with the anonymous release of stolen emails?
Accurate.
Russia committed federal crimes in order to help Donald Trump?
When you're talking about the computer crimes charged in our case, absolutely.
The Trump campaign
Woo!
officials
My
built
God,
their
how much
strategy, their
work
messaging
there is.
strategy around those stolen documents?
Generally, that's true.
And then they lied to cover it up.
Generally, that's true.
Thank you, Mr. Nunes.
Thank you. Welcome.
This is sickening. This is absolutely appalling. One must ask the question, how have we moved into this arena of understanding the consequences but people still projecting these type of actions. Sad, sad, sad. This is a sad day in America. Let's pause for a second for prayer. Father, eternal God, if there's ever been a time that we needed your guidance, we needed your divine leadership, if there was ever a time that we needed your grace, here in America, one of the greatest nations in the world, we believe that it is of today. We pray, Lord, that you will continue to bless America and be with us and guide us and direct us through these darkest moments that we're in right now. That, as far as I am concerned, are probably some of the darkest pertaining to the fundamental affairs that our government was designed to construct. We just ask, God, that you, Lord, will bring justice to those that needs justice and redeem this great nation in the eyes of all the other nations for a healing that will come about because of all this. We pray, Lord, in this free world society that we live in, that because we are understanding the graphs of high treason affairs, that only you and you alone can identify the seriousness thereof. We pray, Father God, in all these things, in your gracious Holy Son's name, and amen. Lord God, have mercy upon us all, because this is going to bust not just the American media wide open, but the world media wide open. Lord, have mercy on us all.
Director, as a former FBI director, you'd agree that the FBI is the world's most capable law enforcement agency.
I would say yes.
The FBI claims the counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign began on July 31st, 2016. But in fact, it began before that. In June 2016, before the investigation officially opened, Trump campaign associates Carter Page and Stephen Mueller, a current Trump advisor, were invited to attend a symposium at Cambridge University in July 2016. Your office, however, did not investigate who was responsible for inviting these Trump associates to this symposium. Your investigators also failed to interview Stephen Schrage, an American citizen who helped organize the event and invited Carter Page to it. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question?
Whether or not you interviewed Stephen Schrage, who organized the Cambridge.
In those areas, I am going to stay away from.
Yeah. The first Trump associate to be investigated was General Flynn. Many of the allegations against him stem from false media reports that he had an affair with a Cambridge academic, Svetlana Lokova, and that Lokova was a Russian spy. Some of these allegations were made public in a 2017 article written by British intelligence historian Christopher Andrew. Your report fails to reveal how or why Andrew and his collaborator, Richard Dearlove, former head of Britain's MI6, spread these allegations. And you failed to interview Svetlana Lokova about these matters. Is that correct?
I'm not going to get into those matters to which you refer.
You had a team of 19 lawyers, 40 agents, and an unlimited budget, correct, Mr. Mueller?
I want to say to my viewers, pertaining to the answers that he's given right now, it's just a kinder, politer way other than saying, I plead the fifth. We've went through this before in other trials and other types of events. Even with Bill Clinton, would get up there, and whenever they would ask him a question, oh, I respectfully decline to answer the question. I plead the fifth. Well, rather than Mr. Robert doing the same in that regard, he comes back with this answer: I decline to answer because of so and so and so and so and so and so, which is fine, because we all have that right in the regard that you don't have to answer the question. And that's exactly what he's doing.
I would not say we had an unlimited budget.
Let's continue with the ongoing.
He said that he answered the question. They did not have an unlimited budget. They did not have a blank check.
Or the opening of the investigation supposedly on July 31st, 2016. The investigation was not opened based on an official product from Five Eyes Intelligence, but based on a rumor conveyed by Alexander Downer. On volume 1, page 89, your report describes him blandly as a representative of a foreign government. But he was actually a long-time Australian politician, not a military or intelligence official, who had previously arranged a $25 million donation to the Clinton Foundation and has previous ties to Dearlove. So Downer conveys a rumor he supposedly heard about a conversation between Papadopoulos and Joseph Mifsud. James Comey has publicly called Mifsud a Russian agent, yet your report does not refer to Mifsud as a Russian agent. Mifsud has extensive contacts with Western governments and the FBI. For example, there is a recent photo of him standing next to Boris Johnson, the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. What we're trying to figure out here, Mr. Mueller, is if our NATO allies or Boris Johnson have been compromised. So we're trying to figure out, Comey says Mifsud is a Russian agent, you do not. So do you stand by what's in the report?
I'd stand by that which is in the report, and not so necessarily with that which is not in the report.
I want to return to Mr. Downer. He denies that Papadopoulos mentioned anything to him about Hillary Clinton's emails. And in fact, Mifsud denies mentioning to Papadopoulos. He denies that Papadopoulos mentioned anything to him about Hillary Clinton's emails. And in fact, Mifsud denies mentioning them to Papadopoulos in the first place. So how does the FBI know to continually ask Papadopoulos about Clinton's emails for the rest of 2016? Even more strangely, your sentencing memo on Papadopoulos blames him for hindering the FBI's ability to potentially detain or arrest Mifsud. But the truth is, Mifsud waltzed in and out of the United States in December 2016. The US media could find him, the Italian press found him, and he's a supposed Russian agent at the epicenter of the purported collusion conspiracy. He's the guy who knows about Hillary Clinton's emails and that the Russians have them. But the FBI failed to question him for a half a year after officially opening the investigation. And then, according to volume 1, page 193 of your report, once Mifsud finally was questioned, he made false statements to the FBI. But you declined to charge him. Is that correct? You did not indict Mr. Mifsud?
Well, I'm not going to speak to the series of happenings as you articulated them.
But you did not indict Mr.
Time of the
Mifsud.
gentleman has expired.
Pardon?
You did not indict Mr. Mifsud.
True.
Mr. Himes.
Director Mueller, thank you for your lifetime of service to this country, and thank you for your perseverance and patience today. Director, your report opens with two statements of remarkable clarity and power. The first statement is one that is, as of today, not acknowledged by the President of the United States, and that is, quote, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. The second statement remains controversial amongst members of this body, same page on your report, and I quote, the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome. Do I have that statement right?
I believe so.
Director Mueller, this attack on our democracy involved, as you said, two operations. First, a social media disinformation campaign. This was a targeted campaign to spread false information on places like Twitter and Facebook. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Facebook estimated, as per your report, that the Russian fake images reached 126 million people. Is that correct?
I believe that's a sum that we record.
Director, who did the Russian social media campaign ultimately intend to benefit? Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump?
Donald Trump.
The second operation, Director...
Let me just say Donald Trump, but there were instances where Hillary Clinton was subject to much the same behavior.
The second operation in the Russian attack was a scheme, what we call the hack and dump, to steal and release hundreds of thousands of emails from the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign. Is that a fair summary?
That is.
Did your investigation find that the releases of the hacked emails were strategically timed to maximize impact on the election?
I'd have to refer you to our report on that question.
Page 36, I quote, the release of the documents was designed and timed to interfere with the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Mr. Mueller, which presidential candidate was Russia's hacking and dumping operation designed to benefit? Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump?
Mr. Trump.
Mr. Mueller, is it possible that this sweeping and systematic effort by Russia actually had an effect on the outcome of the presidential election?
Those issues are being or have been investigated by other entities.
126 million Facebook impressions, fake rallies, attacks on Hillary Clinton's health. Would you rule out that it might have had some effect on the election?
I'm not going to speculate.
Mr. Mueller, your report describes a third avenue of attempted Russian interference. That is the numerous links and contacts between the Trump campaign and individuals tied to the Russian government. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that question?
Your report describes what is called a third avenue of Russian interference, and that's the links and contacts between the Trump campaign and individuals tied to the Russian government.
Yes.
Let's bring up slide 1, which is about George Papadopoulos, and it reads, on May 6, 2016, 10 days after that meeting with Mifsud, much discussed today, Papadopoulos suggested to a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And Director, that's exactly what happened 2 months later, is it not?
Well, I can speak to the excerpt that you have on the screen as being accurate from the report, but not the second half of your question.
Well, the second half, just to refer to page 6 of the report, is that on July 22nd, through WikiLeaks, thousands of these emails that were stolen by the Russian government appeared, correct? That's on page 6 of the report. This is the WikiLeaks posting of those emails.
I can't find it quickly, but please continue.
Okay. So just to be clear, before the public or the FBI ever knew, the Russians previewed for a Trump campaign official, George Papadopoulos, that they had stolen emails that they could release anonymously to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. Is that correct?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Director, rather than report this contact with Joseph Mifsud and the notion that there was dirt that the campaign could use, rather than report that to the FBI that I think most of my constituents would expect an individual to do, Papadopoulos in fact lied about his Russian contacts to you. Is that not correct?
That's true.
Why?
We have an election coming up in 2020, Director. If a campaign receives an offer of dirt from a foreign individual or a government, generally speaking, should that campaign report those contacts?
Should be, it can be, depending on the circumstances of crime.
But I will yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Conaway.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller, did anyone ask you to exclude anything from your report that you felt should have been in the report?
I don't think so, but it's not a small report.
But no one asked you specifically to exclude something that you believe should have been in there?
Not that I can recall, no.
I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Ratcliffe. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Good afternoon, Director Mueller. In your May 29th press conference, and again in your opening remarks this morning, you made it pretty clear you wanted the special counsel report to speak for itself. You said at your press conference that that was the office's final position, and we will not comment on any other conclusions or hypotheticals about the president. Now, you spent the last few hours of your life from Democrats trying to get you to answer all kinds of hypotheticals about the president, and I expect that it may continue for the next few hours of your life. I think you've stayed pretty much true to what your intent and desire was, but I guess regardless of that, the special counsel's office is closed and it has no continuing jurisdiction or authority. So what would be your authority or jurisdiction for adding new conclusions or determinations to the special counsel's written report?
As to the latter, I don't know or expect changes in conclusions that we included in our report.
So to that point, you addressed one of the issues that I needed to, which was from your testimony this morning, which some construed as a change to the written report. You talked about the exchange that you had with Congressman Lieu. I wrote it down a little bit different. I want to ask you about it so that the record's perfectly clear. I recorded that he asked you, quote, "The reason you did not indict Donald Trump is because of the OLC opinion stating you cannot indict a sitting president," to which you responded, "That is correct." That response is inconsistent. I think you'll agree with your written report. I want to be clear that it is not your intent to change your written report. It is your intent to clarify the record to that.
As I started today, this afternoon, and added either a footnote or an endnote, what I wanted to clarify is the fact that we did not make any determination with regard to culpability in any way. We did not start that process down the road.
Terrific. Thank you for clarifying the record. A stated purpose of your appointment as special counsel was to ensure a full and thorough investigation of the Russian government efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. As part of that full and thorough investigation, what determination did the special counsel office make about whether the Steele dossier was part of the Russian government efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election?
Again, when it comes to Mr. Steele, I defer to the Department of Justice.
Well, first of all, Director, I very much agree with your determination that Russia's efforts were sweeping and systematic. I think it should concern every American. That's why I want to know just how sweeping and systematic those efforts were. I want to find out if Russia interfered with our election by providing false information through sources to Christopher Steele about a Trump conspiracy that you determined didn't exist.
Well, I'm not going to discuss the issues with regard to Mr. Steele. And in terms of a portrayal of the conspiracies, we returned 2 indictments in the computer crimes arena, one GRU and another act of measures in which we lay out in excruciating detail what occurred in those 2 rather large conspiracies.
I agree with respect to that, but why this is important is an application and 3 renewal applications were submitted by the United States government to spy or surveil on Trump campaign Carter associate, or Carter Page, and on all 4 occasions, the United States government submitted the Steele dossier as a central piece of evidence with respect to that. Now, the basic premise of the dossier, as you know, was that there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, but the special counsel investigation didn't establish any conspiracy, correct?
Well, what I can tell you is that the events that you are characterizing here now is part of another matter that is being handled by the Department of Justice.
But you did not establish any conspiracy, much less a well-developed one.
Again, I pass on answering that question.
The special counsel did not charge Carter Page with anything, correct?
Special counsel did not.
All right. My time has expired. I yield back.
Ms. Sewell.
Director Mueller, I'd like to turn your attention to the June 9th, 2016 Trump Tower meeting. Slide 2, which should be on the screen now, is part of an email chain between Donald Trump Jr. and a publicist representing the son of a Russian oligarch. The email exchange ultimately led to the now infamous June 9th, 2016 meeting. The email from the publicist to Donald Trump Jr. reads in part, "The Crown Prosecutor of Russia offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia, and is a part of Russia and its government's support of Mr. Trump. In this email, Donald Trump Jr. is being told that the Russian government wants to pass along information which would hurt Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, Trump Jr.'s response to that email is slide 3. He said, and I quote, "If it is what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer." Then Donald Jr. Invited senior campaign officials, Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner, to the meeting, did he not?
He did.
This email exchange is evidence of an offer of illegal assistance, is it not?
I cannot adopt that characterization.
But isn't it against the law for a presidential campaign to accept anything of value from a foreign government?
Generally speaking, yes, but generally the cases are unique.
Well, you say in page 184 in volume 1 that the federal campaign finance law broadly prohibits foreign nationals from making contributions, etc. And then you say that foreign nationals may not make a contribution or donation of money or anything of value. It says clearly in the report itself.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, let's turn to what actually happened at the meeting. When Donald Trump Jr. and the others got to the June 9th meeting, they realized that the Russian delegation didn't have the promised quote-unquote dirt. In fact, they got upset about that, did they not?
Generally, yes.
What I'm hearing is an individual that is contradicting himself because of whatever reasons. He gives one answer to justify one group of people and gives another answer, which is a different answer, to justify another group of people. Wish-washing. White man speak with forked tongue. This is not how that our laws is written out in our Constitution. And for this to have been going on either side, I find it to be appalling. I find it to be heartbreaking and sickening of what has been going on up on top of the hill or the White House. And if others agree with me, that's fine. And if others don't agree with me, that's fine too. But this is my opinion, and I have a right to my opinion pertaining to the Mueller testimony.
You say in volume 1, page 118, that you say in volume 1, page 118, that Trump Jr. asked, "What are we doing here? What do they have on Clinton?" And during the meeting, Kushner actually texted Manafort saying it was, quote, "a waste of time," end quote. Is that correct?
I believe it's in the report along the lines you specify.
So to be clear, top Trump campaign officials learned that Russia wanted to help Donald Trump's campaign by giving him dirt on his opponent. Trump Jr. said loved it. Then he and senior officials held a meeting with the Russians to try to get that Russian help. But they were disappointed because the dirt wasn't as good as they had hoped. So to the next step, did anyone, to your knowledge, in the Trump campaign ever tell the FBI of this offer?
I don't believe so.
Did Donald Trump Jr. tell the FBI that they received an offer of help from the Russians?
That's about all I'll say on this aspect of it.
Wouldn't it be true, sir, that if they had reported it to the FBI or anyone in that campaign during the course of your 2-year investigation, you would have uncovered such a...
I would hope, yes.
Yes. Sir, is it not the responsibility of political campaigns to inform the FBI if they receive information from a foreign government?
I would think that that's something they would and should do.
Well, not only did the campaign not tell the FBI, they sought to hide the existence of the June 9th meeting for over a year. Is that not correct?
On the general characterization, I would question it. If you're referring to later initiative that flowed from the media, then
No, what I'm suggesting is that you've said in volume 2, page 5, on several occasions the president directed aides not to publicly disclose the email setting up the June 9th meeting.
Yes, that's accurate.
Thanks. Sir, given this illegal assistance by Russians, you chose, even given that, you did not charge Donald Trump Jr. or any of the other senior officials with conspiracy. Is that right?
Correct.
And while it
When
may
you're
not...
talking about, if you're talking about other individuals, you're talking about the attendees.
Yes, that's
on
right.
June 9, and that's
right.
accurate.
So, Mr. Mueller, even though you didn't charge them with conspiracy, don't you think that the American people would be concerned that these 3 senior campaign officials eagerly sought a foreign adversary's help to win elections? And don't you think that reporting that is important, that we don't set a precedent for future elections?
I can't accept that kind of characterization.
Well, listen, I think that it seems like a betrayal of American values to me, sir, that someone with, if not being criminal, is definitely unethical and wrong. And I would think that we would not want to set a precedent that political campaigns should not divulge of information if it's foreign government's assistance. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Turner.
Mr. Mueller, I have your opening statement, and in the beginning of your opening statement, you indicate that pursuant to Justice Department regulations, that you submitted a confidential report to the Attorney General at the conclusion of the investigation. What I'd like you to confirm is the report that you did, that is the subject matter of this hearing, was to the Attorney General.
Yes.
Now, you also state in this opening statement that you threw overboard the word collusion, because it's not a legal term. You would not conclude because collusion was not a legal term.
Well, it depends on how you want to use the word. In the general parlance, people can think of it that way, but if you're talking about in the criminal statute arena, you can't, because it really is much more aptly and accurately described as conspiracy.
Right, so your words are it's not a legal term, so you didn't put it in your conclusion, correct? That's what your opening statement is. Mr. Mueller, I want to talk about your powers and authorities. Now, the Attorney General in the appointment order gave you powers and authorities that reside in the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General has no ability to give you powers and authority greater than the powers and authority of the Attorney General, correct?
No, I don't believe, I think that out. It's correct.
Mr. Mueller, I want to focus on one word in your report. It's the second to the last word in the report. It's exonerate. The report states, accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it does not exonerate him. Now, in the judiciary hearing, in your prior testimony, you've already agreed with Mr. Radcliffe that exonerate is not a legal term, but there is not a legal test for this. So I have a question for you, Mr. Mueller. Mr. Mueller, does the Attorney General have the power or authority to exonerate? Now, what I'm putting up here is the United States Code. This is where the Attorney General gets his power, and the Constitution and the annotated cases of these, which we've searched. We even went to your law school, because I went to Case Western, but I thought maybe your law school teaches it differently. And we got the criminal law textbook from your law school. Mr. Mueller, nowhere in these, because we had them scanned, is there a process or description on exonerate. There's no office of exoneration at the Attorney General's office. There's no certificate at the bottom of his desk. Mr. Mueller, would you agree with me that the Attorney General does not have the power to exonerate?
I'm going to pass on that.
Why?
Because it embroils us in a legal discussion. I'm not prepared to do a legal discussion in that arena.
Well, Mr. Mueller, you would not disagree with me when I say that there is no place that the Attorney General has the power to exonerate, and he's not been given that authority. You would not.
Yeah, and I'm not going to. I take your question.
Great. Well, the one thing that I guess is that the Attorney General probably knows that he can't exonerate either. And that's the part that kind of confuses me. Because if the Attorney General doesn't have the power to exonerate, then you don't have the power to exonerate. And I believe he knows he doesn't have the power to exonerate. And so this is the part that I don't understand. If your report is to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General doesn't have the power to exonerate, and he does not, and he knows that you do not have that power, you don't have to tell him that you're not exonerating the president. He knows this already. So then that kind of changed the context of the report.
No, we included in the report for exactly that reason. He may not know it, and he should know it.
So you believe that the Attorney Bill Barr believes that somewhere in the hallways of the Department of Justice there's an office of exoneration?
No, that's not what I said.
Well, I believe he knows, and I don't believe you put that in there for Mr. Barr. I think you put that in there for exactly what I'm going to discuss next, and that is, so the Washington Post yesterday, when speaking of your report, the article said Trump could not be exonerated of trying to obstruct the investigation itself. Trump could not be exonerated. Now, that statement is correct, Mr. Mueller, isn't it? In that no one can be exonerated. The reporter wrote this. This reporter can't be exonerated. Mr. Mueller, you can't be exonerated. In fact, in our criminal justice system, there is no power or authority to exonerate. Now, this is my concern, Mr. Mueller. This is the headline on all of the news channels while you were testifying today. Mueller, Trump was not exonerated. Now, Mr. Mueller, what you know is that this can't say Mueller exonerated Trump, because you don't have the power or authority to exonerate Trump. You have no more power to declare him exonerated than you have the power to declare him Anderson Cooper. So the problem that I have here is that since there's no one in the criminal justice system that has that power, the president pardons, he doesn't exonerate. Courts and juries don't declare innocent, they declare not guilty. They don't even declare exoneration. The statement about exoneration is misleading, and it's meaningless, and it colors this investigation one word out of the entire portion of your report, and it's a meaningless word that has no legal meaning, and it has colored your entire report.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Mueller, for your years of service to our country. I want to look more closely, sir, at the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, an individual who I believe betrayed our country, who lied to a grand jury, who tampered with witnesses, and who repeatedly tried to use his position with the Trump campaign to make more money. Let's focus on the betrayal and greed. Your investigation, sir, found a number of troubling contacts between Mr. Manafort and Russian individuals during and after the campaign. Is that right, sir?
Right. Correct.
In addition to the June 9th meeting just discussed, Manafort also met several times with a man named Konstantin Kilimnik, who the FBI assessed to have ties with Russian intel agencies. Is that right, sir?
Correct.
In fact, Mr. Manafort didn't just meet with him, he shared private Trump campaign polling information with this man linked to Russian intelligence. Is that right, sir?
That is correct.
And in turn, the information was shared with a Russian oligarch tied to Vladimir Putin. Is that right, sir?
Allegedly.
Director Mueller, meeting with him wasn't enough. Sharing internal polling information wasn't enough. Mr. Manafort went so far as to offer this Russian oligarch tied to Putin a private briefing on the campaign. Is that right, sir?
Yes, sir.
And finally, Mr. Manafort also discussed internal campaign strategy on 4 battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, with the Russian intelligence-linked individual. Did he not, sir?
And that's reflected in the report, as were the items you listed previously.
Director Mueller, based on your decades of years of experience at the FBI, would you agree, sir, that it creates a national security risk when a presidential campaign chairman shares private polling information on the American people, private political strategy related to winning the votes of the American people, and private information about American battleground states with a foreign adversary?
Is that the question, sir?
Yes, sir.
I'm not going to speculate along those lines. To the extent that it's within the lines of the report, then I support it. Anything beyond that is not part of that which I would support.
Well, I think it does, sir. I think it shows an infuriating lack of patriotism from the very people seeking the highest office in the land. Director Mueller, Manafort didn't share this information in exchange for nothing, did he, sir?
I can't answer that question without knowing more about the question.
Well, it's clear that he hoped to be paid back money he was owed by Russian or Ukrainian oligarchs in return for the passage of private campaign information, correct?
That is true.
Director Mueller, as my colleague Mr. Heck will discuss later, greed corrupts. Would you agree, sir, that the sharing of private campaign information in exchange for money represents a particular kind of corruption, one that presents a national security risk to our country, sir?
I'm not going to opine on that. I don't have the expertise in that arena to really opine.
Would you agree, sir, that Manafort's contacts with Russians close to Vladimir Putin and his efforts to exchange private information on Americans for money left him vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians?
I think generally so, that would be the case.
Would you agree, sir, that these acts demonstrated a betrayal of the democratic values of our country rests on?
I can't agree with that.
Director Mueller?
Not that it's not true, but I cannot agree with it.
Yes, sir. Director Mueller, well, I can tell you that in my years of experience as a law enforcement officer and as a member of Congress, fortunate to serve on the Intel Committee, I know enough to say yes. Trading political secrets for money with a foreign adversary can corrupt, and it can leave you open to blackmail, and it certainly represents a betrayal of the values underpinning our democracy. I want to thank you for your service again, Director Mueller. We appreciate you for coming today. I yield back, Chairman.
Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here today. Mr. Mueller, is it accurate to say your investigation found no evidence that members of the Trump campaign were involved in the theft or publication of Clinton campaign-related emails?
Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
Is it accurate to say your investigation found no evidence that members of the Trump campaign were involved in the theft or publication of the Clinton campaign-related emails?
I don't know. I don't know what they.
Well, Volume 1, page 5, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So it would therefore be inaccurate, based on this, to describe that finding as open to doubt, that finding being that a Trump campaign was involved with theft or publication of the Clinton campaign emails. Are you following that, sir?
I do believe I'm following it, but it is that portion of that matter, it does not fall within our jurisdiction or fall within our investigation.
Well, basically what your report says, Volume 1, page 5, I just want to be clear that open to doubt is how the committee Democrats described this finding in their minority views to our 2018 report. And it kind of flies in the face of what you have in your report. But so is it accurate also to say the investigation found no documentary evidence that George Papadopoulos told anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign about Joseph Misfit's claims that the Russians had dirt on candidate Clinton?
Let me turn that over to Mr. Zebley.
I'd like to ask you, sir. This is your report, and that's what I'm basing this on.
And then could you repeat the question for me again?
Yeah, is it accurate to say the investigation found no documentary evidence that George Papadopoulos told anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign about Joseph Misfit's claims that the Russians had dirt on candidate Clinton?
I believe it appearing in the report that it's accurate.
Okay, so in the report, it says no documentary evidence that Papadopoulos shared this information with the campaign. It's therefore inaccurate to conclude that by the time of the June 9, 2016 Trump Tower meeting, quote, the campaign was likely already on notice via George Papadopoulos' contact with Russian agents that Russia, in fact, had damaging information on Trump's opponent. Would you say that that is inaccurate to say that it's likely already on?
I could direct you to the report.
Well, I appreciate that because the Democrats jumped to this incorrect collusion in their minority views, again, which contradicts what you have in your report. I'm concerned about a number of statements I'd like you to clarify because a number of Democrats have made some statements that I have concerns with, and maybe you can clear them up. So a member of this committee said President Trump was a Russian agent after your report was publicly released. That statement is not supported by your report, correct?
That is accurate. It's not supported.
Multiple Democrat members have asserted that Paul Manafort met with Julian Assange in 2016 before WikiLeaks released DNC emails implying Manafort colluded with Assange. Because your report does not mention finding evidence that Manafort met with Assange, I would assume that means you found no evidence of this meeting. Is that assumption correct?
I'm not certain I agree with that assumption.
But you make no mention of it in your report. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, Mr. Mueller, does your report contain any evidence that President Trump was enrolled in the Russian system of compromat as a member of this committee once claimed?
Well, what I can speak to is information and evidence that we picked up as the special counsel, and I think that's accurate as far as it goes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's go for a second to scope. Did you ask the Department of Justice to expand the scope of the special counsel's mandate related to August 2nd, 2017 or August 20th, 2017 scoping memoranda?
Well, without looking at the memoranda, I could not answer that.
Well, let me ask you, did you ever make a request to expand your office's mandate at all?
Generally, yes.
And was that ever denied?
I'm not going to speak to that.
You're not going
It goes to the internal deliberations.
Well, I'm just trying to understand process. Does expanding the scope come from the acting attorney general or Rosenstein, or does it come from you, or can it come from either?
I'm not going to discuss any other alternatives.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, I think I can say without fear of contradiction that you're the greatest patriot in this room today, and I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You said in your report, and I'm going to quibble with you.
Okay? He's the greatest patriot in that room today. But you're going to scrutinize, analyze, dissect, question, debate, ridicule everything that the man has put in this report. This guy is in the hot seat. He's got all these people listening to him and staring at him. He has to be one of the most coolest cucumbers that I've ever seen in my entire life. Because if I was to be put in his position for probably 20 minutes, I would go to sweating bullets, and just the mere fact that they was putting me through this, put me through the mill, would be enough to almost cause an individual to have a coronary arrest. This guy is as cool and as calm and as cold as a cucumber. And he's being bombarded by all these contradictory statements that it's obvious that some of them he just don't understand. He's struggling towards understanding what all this is about because of the enormity of it in regard to a free, open, fair society. It's sad. It's really sad that we're having to deal with this on an open public level of questioning our own motives of the who, the what, the when, and the why. It's almost like cheaters. When you have someone that lies, and then they have to tell a lie to cover up the first lie, then they have to tell another lie to cover up the second and the first lie, they're a bunch of cheaters. They're a bunch of manipulators. These people are not true at heart that have been involved in this investigation. And whenever you have the pot calling the kettle black, which once more, this isn't no type of discriminating racial remark, but when you have the pot calling the kettle black, and then on top of that you have people that's saying, oh, what's fair for the goose is fair for the gander. This is the type of ill will that has been committed in amongst high-ranking officials as far as high treasonous affairs. It's really sad. We have come to this moment in the 21st century pertaining to what our ancestors originally designed this country to be, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Because they're not separating it in proper form, which I realize they did separate it today. They separated one part and then they're talking about another part here. So they did separate it to one degree. But because of the enormity of all of it that they're throwing out there to the general public, it's going to be so overwhelming to the general public that the general public is going to scratch their heads and say, wow, what did we just get through experiencing?
And I don't think it was just sweeping and systematic. I think it was sinister and scheming.
What did we just get through experiencing? What did we just get through hearing? What did the heck just got through happening up on top of the hill?
And having said that, one of my colleagues earlier here referred to this Russian intervention as a hoax. And I'd like to get your comment on that. On page 26 of your report, you talk about the Internet Research Agency and how tens of millions of U.S. persons became engaged with the posts that they made, that there were some 80,000 posts on Facebook, that Facebook itself admitted that 126 million people had probably seen the posts that were put up by the Internet Research Agency, that they had 3,800 Twitter accounts and had designed more than 175,000 tweets that probably reached 1.4 million people. The Internet Research Agency was spending about $1.25 million a month on all of this social media in the United States in what I would call an invasion in our country. Would you agree that it was not a hoax, that the Russians were engaged in trying to impact our election?
Absolutely. That was not a hoax. The indictments we returned against the Russians, 2 different ones, were substantial in their scope, using
there you go
again. And I think we have underplayed to a certain extent that aspect of our investigation that has and would have long-term damage to the United States that we need to move quickly to address.
Thank you for that. I'd like to drill down on that a little bit more. The Internet Research Agency actually started in 2014.
Prevent from happening again.
To whether or not Russia...
Prevent from happening again. Prevent from happening again. Prevent from happening again is the words that Mr. Mueller should have just got through saying. Mr. Robert Mueller should have just got through saying.
Let me ask you this. Oftentimes when we engage in these hearings, we forget the forest for the trees. You have a very large report here of over 400 pages. Most Americans have not read it. We have read it. Actually, the FBI director yesterday said he hadn't read it, which was a little discouraging. But on behalf of the American people, I want to give you a minute and 39 seconds to tell the American people what you would like them to glean from this report.
Well, we spent substantial time assuring the integrity of the report, understanding that it would be our living message to those who come after us. But it also is a signal, a flag to those of us who have some responsibility in this area to exercise those responsibilities swiftly and don't let this problem continue to linger as it has over so many years.
All right, you didn't take the whole amount of time, so I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Dr. Mueller, I wanted to ask you about conspiracy. Generally, a conspiracy requires an offer of something illegal, the acceptance of that offer, and an overt act in furtherance of it. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Don Jr. was made aware that the Russians were offering dirt on his opponent, correct?
I don't know that for sure, but one would assume, given presence at the meeting.
And when you say that you would love to get that help, that would constitute an acceptance of the offer?
It's a wide open request.
And it would certainly be evidence of an acceptance if you say, when somebody offers you something illegal and you say, I would love it, that would be considered evidence of an acceptance.
I'm going to stay away from any addressing one particular or two particular situations.
Well, this particular situation, I'll have to continue in a bit. Now yield to Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Mueller, it's been a long day. Thank you for being here. I do have a series of important questions for you, but before I do that, I want to take a moment to reemphasize something that my friend Mr. Turner has said. I've heard many people state no person is above the law. And many times recently they add not even the president, which I think is blazingly obvious to most of us.
I'm having a little problem hearing you, sir.
Is this better?
That is better, thank you.
I want you to know I agree with this statement that no person is above the law. But there's another principle that we also have to defend, and that is the presumption of innocence. And I'm sure you agree with this principle, though I think the way that your office phrased some parts of your report, it does make me wonder. I have to be honest with you. For going on 3 years, innocent people have been accused of very serious crimes, including treason. Accusations made even here today. They have had their lives disrupted and in some cases destroyed by false accusations for which there is absolutely no basis other than some people desperately wish that it was so. But your report is very clear. No evidence of conspiracy, no evidence of coordination. And I believe we owe it to these people who have been falsely accused, including the president and his family, to make that very clear. Mr. Mueller, the credibility of your report is based on the integrity of how it is handled. And there's something that I think bothers me and other Americans. I'm holding here in my hand a binder of 25 examples of leaks that occurred from the special counsel's office from those who associated with your work, dating back to as early as a few weeks after your inception and the beginning of your work, and continuing up to just a few months ago. All of them have one thing in common. They were designed to weaken or to embarrass the president, every single one. Never was it leaked that you'd found no evidence of collusion. Never was it leaked that the Steele dossier was a complete fantasy.
He did not say that he did not find evidence of a conclusion. He said that his department could not come to that determination. So now they're mischaracterizing his words.
Well, I'm not going to talk about specifics. I will mention, but talk for a moment about persons who become involved in an investigation and the understanding that in a lengthy, thorough investigation, some persons will be under a cloud that should not be under a cloud. But
some people should be under a cloud that should have been under a cloud, vice versa. The fact of the matter is these type of crimes have been committed pertaining to, you got it, treasonous acts. It's really sad. It's really, really sad how that somebody like Mr. Stewart there can take things out of context and start blabbing off at the mouth, not even in a hypothetical way, but it's really sad. It's really, really sad.
Fully capture the context of your report. You stated earlier today that response was not authorized. Did you make any effort to determine who leaked this confidential letter?
No, and I'm not certain. This is the letter of March 27th?
Yes, sir.
I'm not certain when it was publicized. I do know it was publicized, but I do not believe we would be responsible for the leaks. Well, I do believe that we have done a good job in assuring that no leaks occur.
We have 25 examples here of where you did not do a good job. Not you, sir. I'm not accusing you at all. But where your office did not do a good job in protecting this information. One more example. Do you know anyone who anonymously made claims to the press that Attorney General Barr's March 24th letter to Congress had been misrepresented or misrepresented the basis of your report?
And what was the question?
Do you know who anonymously made claims to the press that Attorney General Barr's March 24th letter to Congress had misrepresented the findings of your report?
No.
So given these examples as well as others, you must have realized that leaks were coming from someone associated with the special counsel's office. What I'd like to ask is,
I do not believe that.
Well, sir, this was your work. You're the only one, your office is the only one who had information regarding this that had to come from your office. Putting that aside, which leads me to my final question, did you do anything about it?
From the outset, we've undertaken to make certain that we minimize the possibility of leaks. And I think we were successful over the 2 years that we were in operation.
Well, I wish you'd been more successful, sir. I think it was disruptive to the American people. My time has expired. I yield back.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for being here. This too shall pass. Earlier today and throughout the day, you have stated the policy that a seated president cannot be indicted, correct?
Right.
And upon questioning this morning, you were asked, could a president be indicted after their service, correct?
Yes.
And your answer was that they could.
They could.
Director, please speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
So
They could.
the follow-up question that should be concerning is, what if a president serves beyond the statute of limitations?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Would it not indicate that if the statute of limitations on federal crimes such as this are 5 years, that a president who serves his second term is therefore under the policy above the law?
I'm not certain I would agree with I'm not certain I would agree with the conclusion. I'm not certain that I can see
But the statute
possibility that you suggest.
But the statute doesn't toll, is that correct?
I don't know specifically.
It clearly doesn't. And I just want, as the American public is watching this and perhaps learning about many of these for the first time, we need to consider that, and that the other alternatives are perhaps all that we have. But I appreciate your response. Earlier in questioning, someone mentioned that it was a question involving whether anyone in the Trump political world publicized the emails, whether or not that was the case. I just want to refer to volume 1, page 60, where we learn that Trump Jr. publicly tweeted a link to the leak of stolen Podesta emails in October of 2016. You're familiar with that?
I am.
So that would at least be a republishing of this information, would it not?
I'm not certain I would agree. I'm not certain I would agree with that.
Director Pompeo assessed WikiLeaks in one point as a hostile intelligence service. Given your law enforcement experience and your knowledge of what WikiLeaks did here and what they do generally, would you assess that to be accurate or something similar? How would you assess what WikiLeaks does?
Absolutely. And they are currently under indictment. It's Julian Assange.
But would it be fair to describe them as, you would agree with Mr. Director Pompeo, that's what he was when he made that remark, that it's a hostile intelligence service, correct?
Yes.
If we could put up slide 6. This just came out, WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, October 10th, 2016. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You got to read it. Donald Trump, October 12th, 2016. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016. Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, November 4th, 2016. Would any of those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not certain I would say.
How do you react to that?
Well, it's probably problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays in terms of giving some, I don't know, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
Volume 1, page 59. Donald Trump Jr. had direct electronic communications with WikiLeaks during the campaign period. On October 3rd, 2016, WikiLeaks sent another direct message to Trump Jr. asking you guys to help disseminate a link alleging candidate Clinton had advocated a drone to attack Julian Assange. Trump Jr. responded that, quote, he had already done so. Same question. This behavior, at the very least, disturbing your reaction?
Disturbing and also subject to investigation.
Could it be described as aid and comfort to a hostile intelligence service, sir?
I wouldn't categorize it with any specificity.
I yield the balance to the chairman, please.
Not sure I can make good use of 27 seconds, but Director, I think you made it clear that you think it unethical, to put it politely, to tout a foreign service like WikiLeaks publishing stolen political documents in the presidential campaign.
Certainly calls for investigation.
Thank you, Director. We're going to go now to Mr. Crawford, and then after Mr. Crawford's 5 minutes, we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here. Days after your appointment, Peter Strzok texted about his concern that there's, quote, no big there in the Trump campaign investigation. Did Strzok or anyone else who worked on the FBI's investigation tell you that around 10 months into the investigation, the FBI still had no case for collusion?
Who? Can you repeat that?
Peter Strzok.
Could you, I'm sorry, can you move the microphone a little closer?
Sure. There's a quote attributed to Peter Strzok. He texted about his concern that there is, quote, no big there in the Trump campaign investigation. Did he or anyone else who worked on the FBI's investigation tell you that around 10 months into the investigation, the FBI still had no case for collusion?
No.
Is the Inspector General report correct that the text messages from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's phones from your office were not retained after they left the special counsel's office?
Well, I don't, it depends on what you're talking about. The investigation into those Peter Strzok went on for a period of time, and I'm not certain what it encompasses. It may well have encompassed what you're reverting to.
Okay, let me move on just real quickly. Did you ask the department to authorize your office to investigate the origin of the Trump-Russia investigation?
I'm not going to get into that. It goes to internal deliberations.
So the circumstances surrounding the origin of the investigation have yet to be fully vetted then. I'm certainly glad that Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney Durham are looking into this matter. With that, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Ranking Member Nunes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Mueller, I want to make sure you're aware of who Fusion GPS is. Fusion GPS is a political operations firm that was working directly for the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democrat National Committee. They produced the dossier, so they paid Steele, who then went out and got the dossier. And I know you don't want to answer any dossier questions, so I'm not going there, but your report mentions Natalia Vesnitskaya 65 times. She meets in the Trump Tower. It's this infamous Trump Tower meeting. It's in your report. You've heard many of the Democrats refer to it today. The meeting was shorter than 20 minutes, I believe. Is that correct?
I think what we have in our report reflects it was about that length.
So do you know, so Fusion GPS, the main actor at Fusion GPS, the president of the company, or the owner of the company, is a guy named Glenn Simpson who's working for Hillary Clinton. Glenn Simpson, do you know how many times Glenn Simpson met with Natalia Vesnitskaya?
Myself? No.
Would it surprise you that the Clinton campaign dirty ops arm met with Natalia Vesnitskaya more times than the Trump campaign did?
Well, this is an area that I'm not going to get into, as I indicated at the outset.
Did you ever interview Glenn Simpson?
I'm going to pass on that.
According to, I'm going to change topics here. According to notes from the State Department official Kathleen Kavalak, Christopher Steele told her that former Russian intelligence head Trubnikov and Putin advisor Surkov were sources for the Steele dossier. Now, knowing that these are not getting into whether these sources were real or not real, was there any concern that there could have been disinformation that was going from the Kremlin into the Clinton campaign and then being fed into the FBI?
As I said before, this is an area that I cannot speak to.
Is that because it's not in the report, or or because of an ongoing
Internal
investigation?
deliberations, other proceedings, and the like.
Okay. When Andrew Weissman and Zaneb Ahmed joined your team, were you aware that Bruce Orr, Department of Justice top official, directly briefed the dossier allegations to them in the summer of 2016?
Again, I'm not going to speak to that issue.
Okay. Before you arrested George Papadopoulos in July of 2017, he was given $10,000 in cash in Israel. Do you know who gave him that cash?
Again, it's outside our ambit, and questions such as that should go to the FBI or the department.
But it involved your investigation.
It involved persons involved in my investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We will stand in recess for 5 or 10 minutes. Please, folks, remain in your seats. Allow the director, Mr. Zebley, to exit the chamber.
You heard the man. According to the chairman, there'll be a brief break here, allowing us to look back at what we just witnessed. I think it is safe to say a rather decidedly different tone and tenor of this afternoon session. Same room, different committee, different bearing certainly by the chairman. The takeaway, two of the quotes I'm looking at that I wrote down: it is not a witch hunt. It was not a hoax. The Democrats were able to establish those quotes from Mr. Mueller. Before Nicole and I go to our panel of experts here, let's look at the answers that Chairman Schiff was able to extract on a rapid fire basis from Director Mueller at the top of this hearing.
When Donald Trump called your investigation a witch hunt, that was also false, was it not?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
When he said it publicly, it was false?
He did say publicly that it was false, yes.
And when he told it to Putin, that was false too, wasn't it?
That I'm not familiar with.
When the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, that was false, wasn't it?
I'm not going to go into the details of the report that along those lines.
But when the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, in fact, he was seeking to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, is he not?
I think there is some question about when this was accomplished.
Well, you would consider a billion-dollar deal to build a tower in Moscow to be business dealings, wouldn't you, Director Mueller?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here we are back again. We have some new friends joining us. Mimi Rocha, former U.S. attorney in former assistant U.S. attorney, Southern District of New York, now with the Pace University School of Law. Neil Katyal, former acting solicitor general for our federal government before the Supreme Court. You know Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from the great state of Missouri. And of course, Nicole Wallace, someone, I won't say who, called that the Red Bull version of Robert Mueller after the break.
He's like such a bad leaker. I had a theory that, listen, this is the last thing I said before this started. This committee is so different. Adam Schiff has been investigating the Russian attack on our democracy since it happened. So Adam Schiff is as steeped in the substance as Robert Mueller, and this was much more a conversation between two professionals who share the same concerns about the gravity of the Russian attack on the 2016 elections in this country. So this felt different because it was different. You also had in Devin Nunes, the other thing that we talked about as we went into this hearing was that the things that are said on Fox News are indiscernible now from Republican House members. That is not more accurate for any two sort of beings on both sides of that divide than Devin Nunes and Sean Hannity. The
world Nunes laid out with Mueller looking up at him is contrary to the world Mueller knows.
Well, because it's BS. I mean, it's a make-believe world. He was throwing out things that are unsubstantiated by any reporting anywhere. I think that what's really important, and I think what our viewers are really hungry for, is where did the substance move? And I think where the substance changed, what's different now than it was when this hearing started a couple hours ago, we now have Robert Mueller in his own voice confirming some of the most alarming and grave pieces of volume 1 of this report, that the Russians wanted Donald Trump, that Donald Trump and his campaign knew that the Russians wanted Donald Trump, that 150 contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians are chronicled in here. Not as much of a sort of semantic game, not as much flipping to certain pages in that obstruction report. And I thought it worked for the special counsel and for the Senate Intel, or the House Intel Committee.
Tennille Katyal, then Mimi Rocca. What did you make of this afternoon?
Yeah, I agree with Nicole to the extent that I think Republicans were cheering, and maybe the president himself, after the first set of hearings in the morning. I think they're not going to be now. I think Schiff was unbelievably effective in telling the story in really simple ways. Not even 150 witnesses or this or that, but I'd say 5 things. Number 1, he said Russia interfered in the election. Number 2, Russia did it to help Trump. Number 3, the Trump campaign welcomed the help from Russia. Number 4, the president's own son welcomed it, said he, quote, loved it. And then number 5, that Trump himself sought to make money from Russia with the Moscow Tower. Those 5 things together are a devastating portrait of, you wouldn't want even, a CEO, of Target or something to have that, but let alone the president of the United States to have these accusations.
Mimi, the only problem is in the television age, Mueller didn't say it the way Neil just said it. And I know that we're keeping account 155 times so far. Robert Mueller has declined to answer or deflected. And so professionals like you watch this with some frustration, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't fault Robert Mueller for being sort of nonpartisan, right? That is not my criticism of him. That's actually, that's him, and that gives him credibility and integrity.
Someone should be, yeah.
But I think what we're missing, and we were talking about a little bit, is the forcefulness. Where is his... He doesn't, frankly, have the command of, it doesn't seem to have the command of the facts that I thought he would. That was supposed to be sort of the best, one of the best things about Mueller. The reason I think Schiff was so good is that he gave the summation and Mueller kind of agreed with it, right? And whereas this morning you had people trying to draw it out of Mueller and he wasn't going to give it. Schiff did it for him. He agreed with it. I wish this hearing had gone first. It would have made so much more sense in the story. Here's what happened and here's why the obstruction matters. Maybe they had a reason for doing it this way. Can't imagine what it is.
Senator.
Well, here I'm confused by the Republicans. They say, oh, this investigation was flawed and it was biased and it was awful and and then they say, oh, the investigation cleared President Trump. Well, the same thing on foreign interference. They say on one hand that the Russians were in fact behind the Steele dossier to try to help Hillary Clinton. Well, that's not what the report says. They were never trying to help Hillary Clinton. That's one thing that's come out very clearly, that Mueller has not equivocated on at all. The Russians wanted Trump. End of discussion. So all of this obfuscation they're doing, they just can't make up their mind. It's like they're doing a short talking point, and none of it makes sense when you string it all together.
I think I can answer this for you, having once been part of the party formerly known as Real Republicans. I think that what they are doing is pulling the thread through from Trump himself. 1 doesn't have to add, 1 plus 1 doesn't have to equal 2 anymore. It can equal -7.
Right.
I mean, Donald Trump said to his supporters many, many months ago, as though preparing the country for today, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears, don't believe what you see, don't believe what you hear. Keep your eyes right here on me. They're not trying to make sense. They're just saying stuff.
As a lawyer, their case is so confusing, it gives me a headache. A jury would just throw up their hands and say, I'm not sure what they're trying to prove here.
Exactly.
So, Senator, forgive me, what do you do about this as a political matter? Let's say you are Speaker Pelosi watching today. We have the House about to go on an extended summer recess after this. What happens? What gives?
Well, I think the one thing they have to do is they really need to put on afterburners these lawsuits compelling testimony. These are contempts. They have to go through the court system. We've got McGahn. Clearly, McGahn needs to testify. And so they've got to get going. And that's what they could do during the break. It would be very powerful to have the White House counsel in front of this committee right after Labor Day. Typically it doesn't take that long, but the courts might, and you guys should weigh in here. Would the courts expedite a determination on contempt? because of the subject matter at hand and who's involved?
I think they would, but I think that the downside is that's still going to take some time, even to go from the trial court to the circuit court and then to the Supreme Court of the United States. We're talking about months. I don't think we would see McGahn testify in September that way. And of course, there is another solution, which is an impeachment proceeding, because that would pierce these privileges and get the show on the road.
It would certainly make their case stronger,
and
right?
Oddly, the president's legal strategy of not giving them any documents, no subpoena, this and that, or not permitting the subpoenas to be enforced, all of that together actually strengthens the hand for impeachment, even if there are Democrats who don't want to do it politically. In order to get to the truth, they may need to do it.
Well, let me echo my friend Nicole Wallace and say, on principle, they should begin the impeachment inquiry. And Pelosi could always say, this will strengthen our legal hand to get the information we need so America has all the facts.
It's just an inquiry, and this will bring Don McGahn
This
front
will bring
and
us
center.
the evidence.
He won't be able to hide behind that. Frank Figliuzzi is waiting to talk with us, and because he ran counter intel at the FBI, Frank, before you do, I want to play this exchange on the topic, very germane, of WikiLeaks.
This just came out, WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, October 10th, 2016. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You got to read it. Donald Trump, October 12th, 2016. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016. Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, November 4th, 2016. Will any of those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not certain I would say.
How do you react to that?
Well, it's probably problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays in terms of giving some, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
Frank Figliuzzi, your take.
So, look, let's cut to the chase here. What Bob Mueller was telling us was essentially this president, by aligning himself and encouraging the activity, the criminal conduct of WikiLeaks, was giving them a boost, encouraging them to do what they needed to do. And make no mistake, we have a president that not only has aligned himself with Putin and other adversaries, but has publicly aligned himself with WikiLeaks, that we treat, the U.S. government treats, our government says, is an adversarial service. They are the equivalent of a foreign intelligence service. And in this case, they were joined at the hip with Russia. They are a mercenary for hire. They will break in and steal and distribute whatever you need done if they feel like doing that. And Bob Mueller, again, may not be coming across as a strong opponent of anything right now, but he strongly said this president gave these bad guys a boost.
So, Nicole Wallace, to Frank's last point, Bob Mueller may not be coming across in a strong manner. How do you take the sum total of today? If you were the Democrats, how do you make it into the movie they were dreaming it would be?
Listen, I come from campaigns where you hang a lantern around your problems, and I think the problem becomes the strength. I think the fact that he doesn't sound aggressive means he's not partisan. The fact that he doesn't sound polished means he's trustworthy. And the fact that he doesn't sound like he's out to get anybody, which is what Chuck Rosenberg said, is the whole point. He wasn't. He was after the truth. So I think he is to be believed. He is to be trusted. He's a reluctant witness. I think he was a reluctant appointee as special counsel. He looks like someone who would rather not have had this job, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it with immense integrity, and that doesn't mean that no Republican has questioned the facts or the conclusions of either volume of his report. No Republican was pointing to a single line and said this isn't true, which means that the Republicans today may not agree with how this was put together, but they have not disputed a single finding of the Mueller report.
Just to repeat some numbers that are germane and important, swearing Mueller in this afternoon was his 90th appearance before Congress. He is 15 days into prior to turning 75 years old.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Swalwell, you are recognized.
Thank you. Director Mueller, as a prosecutor, you would agree that if a witness or suspect lies or obstructs or tampers with witnesses or destroys evidence,
during an investigation, that generally that conduct can be used to show a consciousness of guilt. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Let's go through the different people associated with the Trump campaign and this investigation who lied to you and other investigators to cover up their disloyal and unpatriotic conduct. If we could put Exhibit 8 up. Director Mueller, I'm showing you campaign chairman Paul Manafort, political advisor Roger Stone, deputy campaign manager Rick Gates, national security advisor Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's personal attorney Michael Cohen, and foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos. These 6 individuals have each been charged, convicted, or lied to your office or other investigators. Is that right?
Yes, although I look askance at Mr. Stone because he is he is in a different case here in D.C.
So National Security Advisor Flynn lied about discussions with Russian ambassador related to sanctions. Is that right?
That's correct.
Michael Cohen lied to this committee about Trump Tower Moscow. Is that correct?
Yes.
George Papadopoulos, the president's senior foreign policy advisor, lied to the FBI about his communications about Russia's possession of dirt on Hillary Clinton. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
The president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, lied about meetings that he had with someone with ties to Russian intelligence. Is that correct?
That's true.
And your investigation was hampered by Trump campaign officials' use of encryption communications. Is that right?
We believe that to be the case.
You also believe to be the case that your investigation was hampered by the deletion of electronic messages. Is that correct?
It would be, yes. Generally, any case would be if those kinds of communications are used.
For example, you noted that Deputy Campaign Manager Rick Gates, who shared internal campaign polling data with the person with ties to Russian intelligence at the direction of Manafort, that Mr. Gates deleted those communications on a daily basis. Is that right?
I take your word. I would say I don't know specifically, but if it's in the report, then I support it.
That's right, Director. It's Volume 1, page 136.
Thank you.
In addition to that, other information was inaccessible because your office determined it was protected by attorney-client privilege. Is that correct?
That is true.
That would include that you do not know whether communications between Donald Trump and his personal attorneys, Jay Sekulow, Rudy Giuliani, and others discouraged witnesses from cooperating with the government. Is that right?
I'm not going to talk to that.
That would also mean that you can't talk to whether or not pardons were dangled through the president's attorneys because the shield of attorney-client privilege.
I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you want to interview Donald Trump Jr.?
I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you subpoena Donald Trump Jr.?
And I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you want to interview the president?
Yes.
Director Mueller, on January 1st, 2017 through March 2019, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in person 6 times, called him 10 times, and exchanged 4 letters with him. Between that time period, how many times did you meet with Donald Trump?
I'm not going to get into that.
He did not meet with you in person, is that correct?
He did not.
As a result of lies, deletion of text messages, obstruction, and witness tampering, is it fair to say that you were unable to fully assess the scope and scale of Russia's interference in the 2016 election and Trump's role in that interference?
I'm not certain I would adopt that characterization in total. There may be pieces of it that are accurate, but not in total.
But you did state in Volume 1, page 10, that while this report embodies factual and legal determinations, the office believes it to be accurate and complete to the greatest extent possible. Given these identified gaps, the office cannot rule out the possibility that the unavailable information would shed additional light. Is that correct?
That is correct. We don't know what we don't know.
Why is it so important that witnesses cooperate and tell the truth in an investigation like this?
Because the testimony of the witnesses goes to the heart of just about any criminal case you have.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back. And thank you, Director Mueller.
Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, as special counsel, did you review documents related to the origin of the counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign?
On occasion.
Was the Steele dossier one of those documents that was reviewed?
And I can't discuss that case.
I'm just asking a process question. Have you read the Steele dossier?
And again, I'm not going to respond to that.
You were tasked as special counsel to investigate whether there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign associates to interfere with the 2016 election. And the FBI, we know, has relevant documents and information related to the opening of the CI investigation. Were you and your team permitted to access all of those documents?
And again, I can't get into that investigative, what we collected and what we're doing with investigation materials.
Let me ask it this way. Was there any limitation in your access to documents related to the counterintelligence?
That's such a broad question that I have real trouble answering it.
Did the special counsel's office undertake any efforts to investigate and verify or disprove allegations contained in the Steele dossier?
Again, I can't respond.
The reason I'm asking for the American public that is watching, it's apparent that the Steele dossier formed part of the basis to justify the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. As we know, it was used to obtain a FISA warrant on Carter Page. This is why I'm asking these questions. Did your office undertake any efforts to identify Steele's sources or subsources?
Again, the same answer.
Were these tasks referred to any other agencies?
Again, I can't speak to it.
Did your office consider whether the Russian government used Steele's sources to provide Steele with disinformation?
Again, I can't speak to that.
I understand I'm asking these questions just for the record, so thanks for your patience. Shifting gears here, did any member of the special counsel's office staff travel overseas as part of the investigation?
Yes, but I can't go further than that.
I'm going to ask, to which countries?
And I can't answer that.
Did they meet with foreign government officials?
Again, it's out of our bailiwick.
Did they meet with foreign private citizens?
Again, same response.
Did they seek information about a U.S. citizen or any U.S. citizens?
Again, a territory that I cannot go to.
Thank you for answering on the record. These are important questions for the American public, and we're hopeful that the IG is able to answer these questions. I will yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
What ranking?
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Mueller, I want to go back to, we started off with
back to him.
Joseph Mifsud, who's at the center of this investigation. He appears in your report a dozen times or more. He really is the epicenter. He's at the origin of this. He's the man who supposedly knows about Clinton's emails. You've seen on the screen, the Democrats have continually put up all the prosecutions that you made against Trump campaign officials and others. But I'm struggling to understand why you didn't indict Joseph Mifsud, who seems to be the man in the middle of all of this.
Well, I think you understand that you cannot get into either classified or law enforcement information without a rationale for doing it. And I have said all I'm going to be able to say with regard to Mr. Mifsud.
Were you aware of Kathleen Kavalek's involvement, that she had met with Ms. Steele, the State Department official?
Again, I can't respond to that question. It's outside my jurisdiction.
Okay. The Carter Page FISA warrant was re-upped 3 times. The last time it was re-upped was under your watch. So were you in the approval process of that last time that the Carter Page warrant was?
Well, I can't speak specifically about that warrant, but if you ask, was I in the approval chain, the answer is no.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Special Counsel Mueller, for your testimony and for your service to our country. Donald Trump over the years has surrounded himself with some very shady people that lied for him, people that covered up for him, people that helped him enrich himself. I want to talk specifically about one of those instances that's in your report. Specifically, let's turn to the Trump Tower Moscow project, which you described in your report as, quote, as a, quote, highly lucrative deal for the Trump organization. Is that right?
I would have to look at the quote from the
Sure.
report if you have it.
Sure, it's on volume 2, page 135. It's described as highly lucrative.
Okay, I have it.
Sure.
I have it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. Your office prosecuted Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen was Donald Trump's lawyer, for lying to this committee about several aspects of the Trump organization's pursuit of the Trump Tower Moscow deal. Is that right?
That's correct.
According to your report, Cohen lied to, quote, minimize links between the project and Trump, unquote, and to, quote, stick to the party line, unquote, in order not to contradict Trump's public message that no connection existed between Trump and Russia. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, when you're talking about the party line here, the party line in this case...
If I could interject, the one thing I should have said at the outset, it was in the report, and consequently, I do believe it to be true.
Thank you. The party line in this case was that the deal ended in January 2016. In other words, they were saying that the deal ended in January 2016 before the Republican primaries. In truth, though, the deal extended to June 2016, when Donald Trump was already the presumptive Republican nominee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Oh. The party line was also that Cohen discussed the deal with Trump only 3 times, when in truth, they discussed it multiple times.
Bad
Is that
timing.
right?
Also true, and part of the basis for the plea that he entered for lying to this entity.
Thank you. And thank you for prosecuting that. The party line was also that Cohen and Trump never discussed traveling to Russia during the campaign, when in truth, they did discuss it. Is that right?
That's accurate.
And the party line was that Cohen never received a response from the Kremlin to his inquiries about the Trump Tower Moscow deal. In fact, Cohen not only received a response from the Kremlin to his email, but also had a lengthy conversation with a Kremlin representative who had a detailed understanding of the project. Is that right?
If it's in the report, that is accurate. A recitation of that piece of the report.
So you have the candidate Trump at the time saying he had no business dealings with Russia, his lawyer who was lying about it, and then the Kremlin who during that time was talking to President Trump's lawyer about the deal. Is that right?
I can't adopt your characterization.
Not only was Cohen lying on Trump's behalf, but so was the Kremlin. On August 30th, 2017, 2 days after Cohen submitted his false statement to this committee, claiming that he never received a response to his email to the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin's press secretary told reporters that the Kremlin left the email unanswered. That statement by Putin's press secretary was false, wasn't it?
I can't speak to that.
Although it was widely reported in the press.
Again, I can't speak to that, particularly if it was dependent upon media sources.
But it was consistent with the lie that Cohen had made to the committee. Is that right?
I'm not certain I could go that far.
So Cohen, President Trump, and the Kremlin were all telling the same lie.
I defer to you on that. I can't get into the details.
Special Counsel Mueller, I want to ask you something that's very important to the nation. Did your investigation evaluate whether President Trump could be vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians because the Kremlin knew that Trump and his associates lied about connections to Russia related to the Trump Tower deal?
I can't speak to that.
I yield back, Chairman.
Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Mueller, you've been asked many times this afternoon about collusion, obstruction of justice, and impeachment and the Steele dossier, and I don't think your answers are going to change if I ask you about those questions. So I'm going to ask about a couple of press stories, because a lot of what the American people have received about this have been on press stories, and some of that has been wrong, and some of those press stories have been accurate. On April 13th, 2018, McClatchy reported that you had evidence Michael Cohen made a secret trip to Prague during the 2016 presidential election. I think he told one of the committees here in Congress that was incorrect. Is that story true?
I can't go into it.
Got you. On October 31st, 2016, Slate published a report suggesting that a server at Trump Tower was secretly communicating with Russia's Alpha Bank, and I quote, akin to what criminal syndicates do. Do you know if that story is true?
Do not.
You do not
know whether it's true.
So did you not investigate these allegations, which are suggestive of potential Trump-Russia?
Because I believe it not true doesn't mean it would not be investigated. It may well have been investigated, although at my belief at this point it's not true.
Good copy. Thank you. As a former CIA...
In other words, he don't know, is what he's trying to say.
Officer, I want to focus on something I think both sides of the political aisle can agree on. That is, how do we prevent Russian intelligence and other adversaries from doing this again? And after overseeing counterintelligence operations for 12 years as FBI director, and then investigating what the Russians have done in the 2016 election, you've seen tactics, techniques, and results of Russian intelligence operations. Our committee made a recommendation that the FBI should improve its victim notification process when a person, entity, or campaign has fallen victim to active measures of attack. Would you agree with this?
It sounds like a worthwhile endeavor. I will tell you, though, that the ability of our intelligence agencies to work together in this arena is perhaps more important than that. And adopting whatever, and I'm not that familiar with legislation, but whatever legislation will encourage us working together. By us, I mean the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the rest. It should be pursued aggressively early.
Who do you think should be responsible within the federal government to counter disinformation?
I'm no longer in the federal government, so
But you've had a long storied career, and I don't think there's anybody who better understands the threat that we are facing than you. Do you have an opinion as a former FBI officer?
As to
who should be the coordinating points within the federal government on how to deal with disinformation?
I don't want to wade in those waters.
A good copy. One of the most striking things in your report is that the Internet Research Agency not only undertook a social media campaign in the U.S., but they were able to organize political rallies after the election. Our committee issued a report and insight on saying that Russian active measures are growing with frequency and intensity, and including their expanded use of groups such as the IRA, and these groups pose a significant threat to the United States and our allies in upcoming elections. Would you agree with that?
Yes. In fact, one of the other areas that we have to look at are many more many more countries are developing capability to replicate what the Russians have done.
Did you hear what he just said? Listen to what this man just said. Listen to this.
The elements of the federal government should be working together. Do you have a suggestion on a strategy to do that, to counter this disinformation?
Not overarching.
Is this, in your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by
the next campaign?
Director Mueller, I appreciate your time and indulging us here in multiple committees.
What he said, it skipped it here on the TV, was that there's other countries trying to duplicate exactly what Russia done pertaining to these social media, internet.
Director Mueller, I'd like to go to the motives behind the Trump
attacks upon to the American free democracy. It's really sad that we have had high-ranking officials that didn't capture this, that wasn't on top of this before it occurred, kind of like whenever they go in and steal people's identity. Just this week, there was a major settlement pertaining to Colfax, pertaining to giving away people's social security numbers and stuff like that. It's really sad that we've got these officials that's supposed to be on top of their game that has let us down. They have let us down in areas that they shouldn't have never let us down in.
With the Kremlin, so let's quickly revisit one financial scheme we just discussed, which was the Trump Tower in Moscow. We indicated earlier that it was a lucrative deal. Trump, in fact, stood, he and his company, to earn many millions of dollars on that deal. Did they not, sir?
True.
And Cohen, Mr. Cohen, his attorney, testified before this committee that President Trump believed the deal required Kremlin approval. Is that consistent with what he told you?
I'm not certain whether it's Mr. Trump himself or others associated with that enterprise that had discussed the necessity of having the input from the state, meaning the Russian government, in order for it to go forward successfully.
Isn't it also true that Donald Trump viewed his presidential campaign, as he told top campaign aides, that the campaign was an infomercial for the Trump organization and his properties?
I'm not familiar with that.
Then let's turn to Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. Did, in fact, your investigation find any evidence that Manafort intended to use his position as Trump's campaign chair for his own personal financial benefit?
I would say there was some indication of that, but I won't go further.
I think you'll find it on page 135 of volume 1. During the transition, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, met with Sergei Gorkov, the head of a Russian-owned bank that is under U.S. sanctions. And according to the head of the bank, he met with Kushner in his capacity as CEO of Kushner Companies to discuss business opportunities. Is that correct, sir?
I'm not certain. I'm not certain about that. Let me just put it that way.
It was asserted thusly in your report, volume 1, 160, and pages 161 and 162. Your report notes that at the time, Kushner Companies were trying to renegotiate $1 billion with a B, $1 billion lease of their flagship building at 666 Fifth Avenue, correct?
I'm not familiar with those financial arrangements.
Also on page 162, where Kushner Companies, it was asserted, had debt obligations coming due on the company. Eric Prince, a supporter close to Trump,
a supporter,
campaign and administrative.
A supporter. I was.
Yes. He met in the Seychelles during the transition with Kirill Dmitriev, who was the head of a sanctioned Russian government investment arm, which had close ties to Vladimir Putin. Correct, sir?
Yes.
Your investigation determined that Mr. Prince had not known nor conducted business with Dmitriev before Trump won the election. Correct?
Well, I defer to the report on that.
Yet it does. And yet Prince, who had connections to top administration, Trump administration officials, met with Dmitriev during the transition period to discuss business opportunities, among other things. But it wasn't just Trump and his associates who were trying to make money off this deal, nor hide it, nor lie about it. Russia was too. That was the whole point, to gain relief from sanctions, which would hugely benefit their incredibly wealthy oligarchs. For example, sanctions relief was discussed at that June 9th meeting in the Trump Tower, was it not, sir?
Yes, but it was not a main subject for discussion.
Trump administration National Security Advisor designate Michael Flynn also discussed sanctions in a secret conversation with the Russian ambassador, did he not?
Correct.
So to summarize, Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, Eric Prince, and others in the Trump orbit all tried to use their connections with the Trump organization to profit from Russia, which was openly seeking relief from sanctions. Is that true, sir?
I'm not certain I can adopt what you
Well, I will, and I'd further assert that was not only dangerous, it was un-American. Greed corrupts. Greed corrupts, and it is a terrible foundation for developing American foreign policy.
Mr. Ratcliffe, Director Mueller, given your constraints on what you're able or allowed to answer with respect to counterintelligence matters or other matters that are currently open and under investigation, you're not going to be able to answer my remaining questions. So I thank you for your courtesies in the answers that you have given to my prior questions. And I do thank you for your extraordinary career and record of service, and yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe and Mr. Mueller. Let me associate my words with Mr. Ratcliffe. Got a few more questions. I want to clean up a little bit about the Eric Prince Seychelles meeting. So Eric Prince testified before this committee that he was surveilled by the U.S. government, and the information from this surveillance was leaked to the press. Did you investigate whether Prince was surveilled and whether classified information on him was illegally leaked to the media?
Did you say did you or will you?
Well, I know you can't. I know you're not.
So I can't discuss either way.
Going to join it back up in the ranks. But did you refer? Were you aware that Prince has made these allegations that he was surveilled? He's concerned that there were leaks about this surveillance. Did you make any referrals about these leaks?
I can't get into discussion on it.
Okay. Also want to, General Flynn, I know you came after the leak of his phone call with the Russian ambassador. Your time at FBI, it would be a major scandal, wouldn't it, for the leak of the National Security Advisor and anyone?
I can't adopt that hypothesis.
Did your report name any people who were acting as U.S. government informants or sources without disclosing that fact?
I can't answer that.
On volume 1, page 133 of your report, you state that Konstantin Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. His name came up quite often today, but your report omits to mention that Kilimnik has long-term relationships with U.S. government officials, including our own State Department.
I can't get into that.
I know it's not in the report, but if Kilimnik is being used in the report to say that he was possibly some type of Russian agent, and I think it is important for this committee to know if Kilimnik has ties to our own State Department, which it appears that he does.
Again, it's the same territory that I'm loath to get into.
You were asked this earlier about Trump attorney John Dowd, that pieces of his phone call were omitted from the report. It was what Mr. Dowd calls exculpatory evidence. You concerned about?
I'm not certain I would agree with that characterization.
Okay.
I think I said that before.
Yes. An American citizen from the Republic of Georgia, who your report misidentifies as a Russian, claims that your report omitted parts of a text message he had with Michael Cohen about stopping the flow of compromising tapes of Donald Trump. In the omitted portions, he says he did not know what the tapes actually showed. Was that portion of the exchange left out of the report for a reason?
No, we got an awful lot into the report, but we did not get every intersection or conversation and the like. So I'm not familiar with that particular episode you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Welch.
Director Mueller, did you find there was no collusion
between the Trump campaign and Russia?
Well, we don't use the word collusion. The word we usually use is well, not collusion, but one of the other terms that that fills in when collusion is not used. In any event, we decided not to use the word collusion inasmuch as it has no relevance to the criminal law arena.
The term is conspiracy that you prefer to use?
That's a conspiracy, exactly right.
You help me, I'll help you.
Thank you.
It's an agreement. Thank you. And in fact, you had to then make a charging decision after your investigation, where unless there was enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, you wouldn't make a charge, correct?
Generally, that's the case.
But making that decision does not mean your investigation failed to turn up evidence of conspiracy.
Absolutely correct.
And in fact, I'll go through some of the significant findings that your exhaustive investigation made. You found, as I understand it, that from May 2016 until the end of the campaign chairman, Mr. Manafort, gave private polling information to Russian agents, correct?
Correct.
And
you speak in the microphone?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. And your investigation found that in June 2016, Donald Trump Jr. made an arrangement to meet at Trump Tower along with Jared Kushner and others, expecting to receive dirt on the Hillary Clinton campaign, correct?
Correct.
And you found in your investigation that on July 27th, candidate Trump called on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's email, something that for the first time they did about 5 hours later, correct?
That's correct.
And you also found that on August 2nd, Mr. Manafort met with a person tied to Russian intelligence, Mr. Klimnik, and gave him internal campaign strategy, aware that Russia was intending to do a misinformation social media campaign, correct?
I'm not certain of the tie there.
But the fact of that meeting, do you agree with?
The fact of the meeting took place is accurate.
In your investigation, as I understand it, also found that in late summer of 2016, the Trump campaign, in fact, devised its strategy and messaging around WikiLeaks releases of materials that were stolen from the Democratic National Committee, correct?
Is that from the report?
Yes, it's according to Mr. Gates.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And you also talked earlier about the finding in your investigation that in September and October of 2016, Donald Trump Jr. had email communications with WikiLeaks, now indicted, about releasing information damaging to the Clinton campaign, correct?
True.
So I understand you made a decision, prosecutorial decision, that this would not rise to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But I ask if you share my concern. And my concern is, have we established a new normal from this past campaign that is going to apply to future campaigns, so that if any one of us running for the U.S. House, any candidate for the U.S. Senate, any candidate for the presidency of the United States, aware that if a hostile foreign power is trying to influence an election, has no duty to report that to the FBI or other authorities?
Well, I hope.
Go ahead.
I hope this is not the new normal, but I fear it is.
And would, in fact, have the ability, without fear of legal repercussion, to meet with agents of that foreign entity hostile to the American election?
I'm sorry, what is the question?
Is that an apprehension that you share with me?
Yes.
And that there would be no repercussions whatsoever to Russia if they did this again. And as you stated earlier, as we sit here, they're doing it now. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right.
Do you have any advice to this Congress as together what we should do to protect our electoral system and accept responsibility on our part to report to you or your successor when we're aware of hostile foreign engagement in our elections?
I would say the basis, the first line of defense really is the ability of the various agencies who have some piece of this to not only share information, but share expertise, share targets, and use the full resources that we have to address this problem.
Thank you, Director Mueller. I yield back.
Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Mueller, thank you. I know it's been a long day, and I want to make clear how much respect I have for your service and for your extraordinary career. And I want you to understand my questions in that context, sir. I'm going to be asking you about Appendix C to your report, and in particular, the decision not to do a sworn interview with the president. It's really the only subject I want to talk to you about, sir. Why didn't you subpoena the president?
Well, at the outset, after we took over and initiated the investigation.
If I could ask you to speak on the mic.
Yeah, of course. At the outset, after we took over the investigation and began it and pursued it, quite obviously one of the things we anticipated wanting to accomplish that is having the interview of the president. We negotiated with him for a little over a year, and I think what you adverted to in the appendix lays out our expectations as a result of those negotiations. But finally, when we were almost towards the end of our investigation, and we'd had little success in pushing to get the interview of the president, we decided that we did not want to exercise the subpoena powers because of the necessity of expediting the end of the investigation.
Was that, excuse me, did you want
I was going to say, the expectation was if we did subpoena the president, he would fight the subpoena and we would be in the midst of the investigation for a substantial period of time.
Right, but as we sit here, you've never had an opportunity to ask the president in-person questions under oath, and so obviously that must have been a difficult decision. And you're right, Appendix C lays that out, and indeed, I believe you described the in-person interview as vital. That's your word, and of course you make clear you had the authority and the legal justification to do it. As you point out, you waited a year. You put up with a lot of negotiations. You made numerous accommodations, which you lay out so that he could prepare and not be surprised. I take it you were trying to be fair to the president. And by the way, you were going to limit the questions when you got to written questions to Russia only. And in fact, you did go with written questions after about 9 months, sir, right? And the president responded to those. And you have some hard language for what you thought of those responses. What did you think of the president's written responses, Mr. Mueller?
It's certainly not as useful as the interview would be.
In fact, you pointed out, and by my count, there were more than 30 times when the president said he didn't recall, he didn't remember, no independent recollection, no current recollection. And I take it by your answer that it wasn't as helpful. That's why you used words like incomplete, imprecise, inadequate, insufficient. Is that a fair summary of what you thought of those written answers?
That is a fair summary. And I presume that comes from the report.
And yet, sir, and I ask this respectfully, by the way, the president didn't ever claim the Fifth Amendment, did he?
I'm not going to talk to that.
Well, from what I can tell, sir, at one point it was vital, and then at another point it wasn't vital. And my question to you is, why did it stop being vital? And I can only think of 3 explanations. One is that somebody told you couldn't do it, but nobody told you couldn't subpoena the president. Is that right?
No, we understood we could subpoena the president.
Rosenstein didn't tell you, Whitaker didn't tell you, Barr didn't tell you couldn't.
We could serve a subpoena.
So the only other explanation, well, there's 2 others, I guess. One, that you just flinched, that you had the opportunity to do it and you didn't do it. But sir, you don't strike me as the kind of guy who flinches.
I hope not.
Well, then the third explanation, I hope not too, sir. And the third explanation I can think of is that you didn't think you needed it. And in fact, what caught my eye was page 13 of volume 2. Where you said, in fact, you had a substantial body of evidence. And you cite a bunch of cases there, don't you, about how you often have to prove intent to obstruct justice without an in-person interview. That's the kind of nature of it. And you use terms like a substantial body of evidence, significant evidence of the president's intent. So my question, sir, is, did you have sufficient evidence of the president's intent to obstruct justice? And is that why you didn't do the interview?
There's a balance. In other words, how much evidence you have to satisfy the last element. Against how much time are you willing to spend in the courts litigating the interview with the president?
And in this case, you felt that you had enough evidence of the president's intent?
we had to make a balanced decision in terms of how much evidence we had compared to the length of time it would take.
And sir, because I have limited time, you thought that if you gave it to the Attorney General or to this Congress, that there was sufficient evidence that it was better than that delay.
Can you state that again?
Well, that it was better than the delay to present the sufficient evidence, your term, of the president's intent to obstruct justice to the Attorney General and to this committee. Isn't that why you didn't do the interview?
No, the reason we didn't do the interview is because of the length of time that it would take to resolve the issues attendant to that.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr.
What an
Chairman.
answer.
And Director Mueller, thank you so much for being a person of honor and integrity. Thank you for your service to the nation. We are certainly better for it. Director Mueller, I too want to focus on the written responses that the president did provide and the continued efforts to lie and cover up what happened during the 2016 election, where the president...
I want to make a comment on what he just said, Mr. Mueller. You would think at the expense of the American democracy that it would be unlimited.
Russia interferes in the 2016
that it would
election.
be unlimited in how much time that they was willing to pursue towards getting to the bottom of the truth pertaining to all this. But that's neither here nor there now.
Credibility.
No, it was perhaps one of the factors, but nothing more than that.
It was one of the factors. So what did you determine about the president's credibility?
And that I can't get into.
Director Mueller, I know based on your decades of experience, you probably had an opportunity to analyze the credibility of countless witnesses, but you weren't able to do so with this witness.
Well, with every witness, particularly a leading witness, one assesses the credibility day by day, witness by witness, document by document. And that's what happened in this case. So we started with very little, and by the end, we ended up with a fair amount. Yeah, fair amount.
Thank you.
Based upon whose timeline? Yours or ours?
Director Mueller, that his answers were not credible at all. Do some of President Trump's incomplete answers relate to Trump Tower in Moscow?
Yes.
For example, did you ask the president whether he had at any time directed or suggested that discussions about Trump Moscow project should cease?
Should what?
Cease.
Do you have a citation?
Yes, we're still in Appendix C, Section 1-7.
The first page?
Uh-huh. Says the president did not answer whether he had at any time directed or suggested that discussions about the Trump Moscow project should cease, but he has since made public comments about this topic.
Okay. And the question was?
Did the president, let me go on to the next question. Did the president fully answer that question in his written statement to you about the Trump Moscow project ceasing? Again, in Appendix C.
And can you direct me to the particular paragraph you're adverting to?
It would be Appendix C-C1, but let me move forward. 9 days after he submitted his written answers, didn't the president say publicly that he, quote, decided not to do the project, unquote? And that is in your report.
I'd ask you if you would to point out the particular paragraph that you're focused on.
We can move on. Did the president answer your follow-up questions? According to the report, there were follow-up questions because of the president's incomplete answers about the Moscow project. Did the president answer your follow-up questions either in writing or orally? And we're now in Volume 2, page 150 through 151.
No.
He did not. In fact, there were many questions that you asked the president that he simply didn't answer. Isn't that correct?
True.
And there were many answers that contradicted other evidence you had gathered during the investigation. Isn't that correct,
yes.
Director Mueller? Director Mueller, for example, the president in his written answer stated he did not recall having advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks releases. Is that correct?
I think that's what he said.
But didn't your investigation uncover evidence that the president did, in fact, have advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks public releases of emails damaging to his opponent?
And I can't get into that area.
Did your investigation determine, after very careful vetting of Rick Gates and Michael Cohen's, that you found them to be credible?
We found the president to be credible?
That you found Gates and Cohen to be credible in their statements about WikiLeaks?
Those areas I'm not going to discuss.
Okay. Could you say, Director Mueller, that the president was credible?
I can't answer that question.
Director Mueller, isn't it fair to say that the president's written answers were not only inadequate and incomplete because he didn't answer many of your questions, but where he did, his answers showed that he wasn't always being truthful?
I would say, generally.
Director Mueller, it's one thing for the president to lie to the American people about your investigation, falsely claiming that you found no collusion and no obstruction, but it's something else altogether for him to get away with not answering your questions and lying about them. And as a former law enforcement officer of almost 30 years, I find that a disgrace to our criminal justice system. Thank you so much. I yield back to the chairman.
Mr. Krishnamurthy.
A disgrace!
Thank you for your devoted service to your country. Earlier today, you described your report as detailing a criminal investigation, correct?
Yes.
Director, since it was outside the purview of your investigation, your report did not reach counterintelligence conclusions regarding the subject matter of your report.
That's true.
For instance, since it was outside your purview, your report did not reach counterintelligence conclusions regarding any Trump administration officials who might potentially be vulnerable to compromise or blackmail by Russia, correct?
Those decisions probably were made in the FBI.
But not in your report, correct?
Not in our report. We advert to the counterintelligence goals of our investigation, which were secondary to any criminal wrongdoing that we could find.
Let's talk about one administration official in particular, namely President Donald Trump. Other than Trump Tower Moscow, your report does not address or detail the president's financial ties or dealings with Russia, correct?
Correct.
Similarly, since it was outside your purview, your report does not address the question of whether Russian oligarchs engaged in money laundering through any of the president's businesses, correct?
Correct.
And of course, your office did not obtain the president's tax returns, which could otherwise show foreign financial sources, correct?
I'm not going to speak to that.
In July 2017, the president said his personal finances were off limits or outside the purview of your investigation, and he drew a quote-unquote red line around his personal finances. Were the president's personal finances outside the purview of your investigation?
I'm not going to get into that.
Were you instructed by anyone not to investigate the president's personal finances?
No.
Mr. Mueller, I'd
why
like to
didn't you?
turn your attention to counterintelligence risks associated with lying. Individuals can be subject to blackmail if they lie about their interactions with foreign countries, correct?
True.
For example, you successfully charged former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn of lying to federal agents about his conversations with Russian officials, correct?
Correct.
Since it was outside the purview of your investigation, your report did not address how Flynn's false statements could pose a national security risk because the Russians knew the falsity of those statements, right?
I cannot get into that mainly because there are many elements of the FBI that are looking at different aspects of that issue.
Currently. Thank you. As you noted in Volume 2 of your report, Donald Trump repeated 5 times in one press conference, Mr. Mueller, in 2016, quote, "I have nothing to do with Russia." Of course, Michael Cohen said Donald Trump was not being truthful because at this time, Trump was attempting to build Trump Tower Moscow. Your report does not address whether Donald Trump was compromised in any way because of any potential false statements that he made about Trump Tower Moscow, correct?
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Director Mueller, I want to turn your attention to a couple other issues. You've served as FBI director during 3 presidential elections, correct?
Yes.
And
Well, that took a
during
long
those
time to
3
answer that
presidential
question.
elections, you have never initiated an investigation at the FBI looking into whether a foreign government interfered in our elections the same way you did in this particular instance, correct?
I would say I personally know, but the FBI quite obviously has how do you defend an attack such as the Russians undertook in 2016?
Now, Director Mueller, is there any information you'd like to share with this committee that you have not so far today?
Well, that's a broad question. And it'd take me a while to get an answer to it, but I'd say no.
Mr. Mueller, you said that every American should pay very close attention to the systematic and sweeping fashion in which the Russians interfered in our democracy. Are you concerned that we are not doing enough currently to prevent this from happening again?
I'll speak generally, and what I said in my opening statement this morning, and here that no, much more needs to be done in order to protect against this intrusions, not just by the Russians, but others as well.
Thank you, Director.
Absolutely.
We have 2 5-minute periods remaining. Mr. Nunes and myself. Mr. Nunes, you are recognized.
Mr. Mueller, it's been a long day for you, and you've had a long, great career. I want to thank you for your longtime service, starting in Vietnam, obviously in the U.S. Attorney's Office, Department of Justice, and the FBI. And I want to thank you for doing something you didn't have to do. You came here upon your own free will, and we appreciate your time today. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Mueller, I want to close out my questions, turn to some of the exchange you had with Mr. Welsh a bit earlier. I'd like to see if we can broaden the aperture at the end of the hearing. From your testimony today, I gather that you believe that knowingly accepting foreign assistance during a presidential campaign is an unethical thing to do.
And a crime.
And a crime.
Circumstances, yes.
And to the degree,
and a crime given certain circumstances.
And to the degree that it undermines our democracy and our institutions, we can agree that it's